red button thought experiment. There is a button. It's small, circular, and glowing faintly red. If you press it, all suffering in the world, every pain, every tear, every scream will vanish forever. No one will suffer again. But there's a catch. To press the button is to end the world, instantly, painlessly, quietly. All life ceases to exist. No more wars, no more disease, no more broken hearts, no more dreams. Would you press it? This is the red button thought experiment, perhaps one of the most extreme and unsettling philosophical dilemmas conceived. It forces you to weigh the total eradication of suffering against the total eradication of existence. Its roots lie in a mix of utilitarian ethics, negative consequentialism, and the works of thinkers like David Benatar, Thomas Metzinger, and Peter Singer. While no one philosopher can be directly credited with the red button scenario itself, its logic echoes debates surrounding antinatalism, total utilitarianism, and the ethics of extinction. At the core of the dilemma is a question of scale. Is a painless, immediate death preferable to a lifetime of intermittent suffering? Can the prevention of all future agony justify the permanent silencing of joy, love, and potential? David Benatar's asymmetry argument argues that not being born spares one from suffering and that the absence of pain is good, even if there is no one to benefit. But the absence of pleasure is not bad, unless someone exists to miss it. From this view, pressing the button is not evil, it's mercy on a cosmic scale. Philosopher Thomas Metzinger takes the idea further with his work on suffering-focused ethics. He posits that the moral goal should not be maximizing happiness, but minimizing suffering. If existence guarantees suffering and non-existence guarantees none, then the moral calculus becomes terrifyingly simple. On the other hand, critics argue this logic is catastrophically flawed. Peter Singer, while sympathetic to the reduction of suffering, does not go so far as to advocate for extinction. He argues for effective altruism, the idea that we should reduce suffering through targeted, evidence-based action, not annihilation. Moreover, others challenge the very framing of the dilemma. What about the value of life, the possibility of change, the beauty in struggle? Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, believed that meaning is found not in the absence of suffering, but in how we respond to it. To eliminate suffering by eliminating life, in this view, is to eliminate the very stage where meaning can unfold. Then, there are the existentialist and religious perspectives. Many belief systems view life, however painful, as sacred. That we are not entitled to end the world, even for noble reasons. That suffering is part of a divine plan, or a karmic cycle, or a necessary condition for growth and redemption. But the button still waits. The sheer simplicity of the red button thought experiment makes it powerful. It cuts through academic jargon and philosophical hedging. It demands an answer. And every answer reveals something about you. Do you believe life is fundamentally good or fundamentally broken? Do you think suffering can be justified by beauty? Or do you see existence as a cosmic accident, better ended with dignity than dragged out in agony? The implications are vast, not just for philosophy, but for ethics, policy, technology, and existential risk management. If we could program an AI to minimize suffering, would it logically reach the conclusion that the optimal solution is extinction? This is not far-fetched. AI alignment theorists like Eliezer Yudkowsky have warned about the unintended consequences of aligning superintelligent agents with misunderstood human values. In medicine and law, the debate over euthanasia and end-of-life choices echoes the same dilemma on a smaller scale. Is it more ethical to prolong life at all costs, or to allow dignified death in the face of hopeless suffering? In literature and media, The red button appears again and again in dystopias, apocalyptic fantasies, and sci-fi narratives. From the doomsday device in Dr. Strangelove to the philosophical musings in Children of Men, the button is always there, unpressed but waiting. Because the real question is not hypothetical, it's personal. When you strip away the abstractions, the red button thought experiment is asking, what do you value more, life or the absence of pain? And in that final moment, if the choice were yours alone, would your hand hover over the button? Would you flinch? Or would you press it? Antinatalism. Imagine you're standing at the threshold of existence. Someone asks, should I bring a new life into the world? On the surface, it's a question of hope, of joy, of creation. But beneath it lies a deeper, darker question. Is life a gift or a burden? If pain, suffering, and death are unavoidable, is existence itself an ethical mistake? This is the foundation of antinatalism, a philosophical position that argues it is morally wrong to bring new sentient life into existence. Unlike traditional ethics, which focus on how to live well, antinatalism turns the question on its head. Should we be here at all? One of its most well-known modern defenders is philosopher David Benatar, whose book, Better Never to Have Been, lays out the asymmetry at the heart of antinatalism. He argues that while the presence of pain is bad, the absence of pain is good, even if there's no one to experience that goodness. Conversely, while the presence of pleasure is good, the absence of pleasure is not bad, unless someone is deprived of it. This asymmetry, Benatar argues, makes non-existence preferable to existence. Imagine a potential child. If born, they may experience joy, but they will also inevitably suffer. They will feel fear, sadness, and pain. If not born, they will experience none of these things and, crucially, will not miss the pleasure they never knew. Benatar's argument is that by choosing not to create life, we avoid all harm without depriving anyone of anything. Antinatalism also draws from the works of ancient philosophers like the Buddha and Sophocles. In the play Oedipus at Colonus, Sophocles wrote, "Never to have been born is best." The sentiment is echoed in Buddhist philosophy, which emphasizes the cessation of suffering through the end of the cycle of rebirth. But antinatalism goes further. It is not just a personal decision, but a universal ethical claim. If true, it implies that all reproduction is morally wrong, that each new birth is not a gift, but a moral error. And this is where the real discomfort begins. Critics of antinatalism often accuse it of nihilism or fatalism. They argue that life, while imperfect, contains beauty, love, and meaning, that suffering is part of the human condition, but not the whole of it, that to exist is to have the potential for joy, for connection, for transcendence. Others challenge Benatar's asymmetry. They argue that the absence of pleasure can be bad, even if there is no one to miss it, that potential people have a kind of moral standing, even if they don't yet exist. And some claim that suffering, while real, is outweighed by the value of existence itself. There are also religious and cultural objections. Many belief systems view life as sacred, a divine gift, or a duty. For them, not having children is a rejection of faith, of tradition, of identity. But antinatalists remain unmoved. For them, the horrors of life are too great to justify its continuation. They point to war, famine, disease, abuse, and despair, not as anomalies, but as constants. For every Mozart, they say, there is a Hitler. For every moment of peace, a scream of pain. In the extreme, some antinatalists argue for voluntary human extinction, a gradual, peaceful end to the human race through a global decision to stop reproducing. The voluntary human extinction movement, VHEMT, advocates for this view, suggesting that humanity's disappearance would relieve suffering and allow the planet to heal. Of course, such a vision is deeply controversial, but it forces us to confront a haunting question. If we cannot guarantee that a life will be good, If we know that suffering is inevitable, then what right do we have to create it? There is also a psychological dimension to antinatalism. For some, it offers clarity, a way to explain their deep unease with the world. For others, it is a radical response to depression, trauma, or existential dread. But regardless of motivation, the philosophy demands to be taken seriously, not because it offers comfort, but because it challenges everything we take for granted about life, birth, and morality. To the antinatalist, existence is not a default good. It is a risk, a gamble, a burden passed from one generation to the next without consent. And so they ask, simply, but devastatingly, if you could prevent suffering entirely by never creating it in the first place, why wouldn't you? Last Thurdayism. Imagine waking up one morning with all your memories intact. Your childhood, your relationships, the sound of your mother's voice, the feel of your first heartbreak, the laughter of a friend long gone. You glance around your room and everything is exactly where you left it. But what if none of it is real? What if the entire universe, everything you see, feel, remember, came into existence just last Thursday? What if your entire history, all your memories, even the wrinkles on your skin and the fading ink on your favorite t-shirt, were fabricated as part of an elaborate illusion? This is the unsettling proposition of last Thurdayism, a thought experiment that suggests the universe may have been created recently, perhaps even last week, but in such a way that it appears billions of years old. Your memories, photographs, historical documents, and fossils were all created as part of this cosmic illusion. Everything is a construct, and the most terrifying part, you can never disprove it. Although the concept may sound modern and absurd, its roots can be traced back to philosophical skepticism and religious arguments. It is often associated with a critique of young Earth creationism, particularly the idea proposed by Philip Henry Goss in 1857. Goss, a naturalist and devout Christian, argued in his book Omphalos that God may have created the earth with the appearance of age, trees with rings, mountains with erosion, and even fossils buried in the ground. The idea was meant to reconcile biblic. Yet last Thurdayism is not just a theological curiosity. It serves as a powerful tool for exposing the limits of epistemology, the philosophical study of knowledge. How do we know what we know? What counts as evidence? If every piece of evidence could have been fabricated as part of the universe's construction, then is any belief truly justifiable? In some ways, it echoes the classic brain in a vat problem, or Descartes' evil demon scenario, hypothetical situations in which all of our experiences are being manipulated by an external force. The modern twist, of course, is the simulation hypothesis, as proposed by philosophers like Nick Bostrom. If an advanced civilization could simulate an entire universe, including conscious beings with false memories, then how could we distinguish simulated life from reality? Last Thurdayism is not meant to be taken literally by most philosophers. Rather, it highlights a deep and disturbing vulnerability in the way we construct truth. If our entire worldview depends on memory and perception, and both can be fabricated, then we are trapped in an epistemic prison, unable to reach beyond the illusion. Critics argue that last Thurdayism is unfalsifiable. It makes no testable predictions and cannot be proven or disproven. For this reason, it is often labeled as pseudoscientific or even absurd. But that's exactly what makes it powerful. Its very absurdity forces us to confront the limits of scientific reasoning. Science is built on observation and repeatability. But what if both can be manufactured? Some defenders of radical skepticism argue that even though last Thurdayism cannot be disproven, it remains a live possibility until we can show that it is logically inconsistent. And so far, we can't. The idea violates no laws of logic or mathematics. It simply feels wrong. But is feeling wrong enough to dismiss a hypothesis? Others approach the problem from a pragmatic angle. Philosophers like William James argue that truth should be judged not by its correspondence to reality, but by its usefulness. If believing in last Thursdayism provides no explanatory power, no predictive value, and no way to improve life, then it can be discarded, not because it's disproven, but because it's useless. But even that response can feel hollow. Isn't the possibility itself unsettling enough to merit serious reflection? The implications are existential. If last Thursdayism is true, then everything we value, history, art, science, relationships, might be nothing more than planted illusions. Your fondest memories, your deepest regrets, your proudest achievements, all might be just data written into a simulation or constructs placed into your mind last week. If none of it is real, then what remains? And yet, in a strange way, the thought experiment becomes a mirror. Even if the world began last Thursday, would that change how you live? If you could never know the difference, if love still feels like love and pain still feels like pain, does it matter? If your memories are fake, but they define who you are they any less meaningful? What last Thursdayism does is strip reality to its barest core. It forces us to ask, what is truth? What is real? And how do we know? And in doing so, it leaves us staring into a void of uncertainty, a place where even time, memory, and existence might be illusions. And you might be someone who didn't even exist until just a few days ago. Wigner's friend. You walk into a lab. Inside is a sealed chamber, and within that chamber, your friend is performing a quantum experiment. They observe a particle, measuring it and recording the result. From their point of view, the result is definite. The quantum wave function has collapsed. The uncertainty is gone. But from your point of view, standing outside the chamber, you haven't opened the door. You don't know what the result is. And according to quantum theory, until you observe your friend, the entire system, your friend, the particle, the measurement, is still in a superposition. To you, the outcome isn't real yet. It exists in a blur of possibilities. This is the Wigner's friend paradox, named after the Hungarian physicist Eugene Wigner, who proposed it in 1961. It builds upon the famous Schrödinger's cat thought experiment, but adds a disturbing twist. It suggests that reality itself may depend on the observer, and that different observers might live in different realities. Wigner originally designed this scenario to illustrate the absurd implications of quantum mechanics when applied to observers. If a friend inside the lab observes a measurement, and someone outside still sees the lab as a superposition, then whose version of reality is correct? Is reality subjective? Can two people legitimately disagree about whether an event has occurred? In classical physics, the idea is unthinkable. Reality is supposed to be objective, the same for everyone. But quantum mechanics seems to defy that principle. In quantum theory, particles exist in a state of probabilities until measured. But what counts as a measurement? What counts as an observer? And what happens when two observers contradict each other? The problem deepens when you consider modern extensions of Wigner's friend. In 2018, physicists Čáslav Bruckner and colleagues proposed an experiment that put the idea to the test and found that, under certain assumptions, two observers can record contradictory facts about the same event, and both can be correct. This result was so radical that it shook the foundations of what we mean by fact itself. The implications are dizzying. If two people can measure the same quantum system and come to different, but internally consistent conclusions, then does an objective reality even exist? Or are we all trapped inside our own quantum bubbles of perception? Some interpretations of quantum mechanics try to resolve this. The many worlds interpretation, for instance, suggests that every possible outcome of a quantum measurement actually happens in a different branch of the universe. In this view, both you and your friend are right. in different worlds. But that only replaces one mystery with another. If every measurement creates a new universe, then reality is not only observer-dependent, it's infinitely branching, forever splitting into parallel timelines. Other physicists turn to quantum Bayesianism, cubism, which argues that the wave function doesn't describe an objective system, but rather an individual's belief about the system. In this interpretation, Wigner and his friend have different knowledge, and so they have different realities. There is no contradiction, only a reminder that quantum mechanics is about information, not objects. But these explanations come at a cost. They force us to abandon cherished notions of objectivity, causality, and even shared experience. In a world where Wigner and his friend cannot agree on what happened, how can we trust consensus reality? If you and I look at the same event and record different outcomes, what does it mean to say that anything actually happened? This paradox also holds deep philosophical consequences. It calls into question the nature of consciousness itself. Wigner speculated that the collapse of the wave function may only occur when observed by a conscious mind, suggesting that consciousness might play a fundamental role in shaping reality. Though this idea remains controversial, it points to a profound mystery. What role does the observer truly play in the universe? In our daily lives, we rely on the assumption that facts are stable, that events are agreed upon, that reality is objective. But Wigner's friend suggests that, at the quantum level, this may be an illusion. And if reality fractures at the smallest scales, what confidence can we have that it holds together at all? You stand outside the chamber. You know your friend has made an observation. But until you open the door, until you look them in the eyes and hear their words, what world are you living in? And when you finally open that door, what world are you stepping into? Is it theirs or is it your own? And could it be that somehow they are not the same? The veil of ignorance. Imagine being handed the blueprints for a new society. You can design everything, its laws, its economy, its institutions. You get to decide who gets wealth, who has power, who does the work, and who reaps the benefits. But before you finalize your design, you're told that once it's complete, you'll be born into it. Without knowing who you'll be, you could be rich or poor, a landowner or landless, born with a disability or with privilege. You might be a leader or a refugee. Now, how would you build your world? This is the veil of ignorance, a thought experiment developed by philosopher John Rawls in 1971 in his seminal work, A Theory of Justice. It's one of the most influential tools in modern political philosophy, aimed at eliminating bias from moral and political decisions by imagining that we know nothing about our place in society. Behind the veil, every personal detail, race, gender, class, ability, nationality, is stripped away. You don't know your social position. All you know is that you will be someone in the society you're building. The purpose? To generate fair and just principles, because you won't be designing for your own benefit. You'll be designing for everyone. If there's a chance you might end up as the most disadvantaged, you'll think twice about neglecting their needs. Rawls argued that this would lead rational people to adopt two key principles: equal basic liberties for all, and a social and economic inequalities arranged so that they benefit the least advantaged. This became the foundation of what he called justice as fairness. But like all thought experiments, the veil of ignorance is more than a tool. It's a mirror. It asks whether we are truly committed to justice or only to maintaining the advantages we already have. In today's world, it applies everywhere: taxation, healthcare, education, housing, immigration. Would you design a healthcare system that denies care to the poor if you might be born into poverty? Would you keep a minimum wage low if you could end up working 2 jobs just to survive? Would you support vast inheritance wealth if you might be born into a family with nothing? Political theorists, ethicists, and economists use this veil to test the legitimacy of policies. If a law or system is fair behind the veil, it's more likely to be fair in the real world. Even AI ethics discussions use Rawlsian reasoning to ensure that automated systems treat people equitably, regardless of background. But critics of the veil of ignorance argue that it assumes people are risk-averse and overly rational. Libertarian philosophers like Robert Nozick reject Rawls' redistributive outcomes, arguing that justice lies in respecting individual rights, not enforcing equality. Nozick's entitlement theory insists that if you acquire your holdings justly, you're entitled to keep them, regardless of inequality. Others say the veil oversimplifies human diversity. We can't really detach ourselves from identity, and even if we could, is a world without knowledge of your social role desirable? Or does it erase important cultural and individual values? Still, the power of the veil lies in its challenge. When faced with massive inequality, systemic discrimination, or environmental collapse, the veil of ignorance doesn't ask you to feel bad. It asks you to imagine fairness. Before, you know your advantage. In social psychology, similar thought experiments reveal how status quo bias blinds people to injustice. If you've never experienced oppression, it's easier to dismiss it. But behind the veil, you can't assume you'll be lucky. It's not about guilt. It's about perspective. Now consider this. If every world leader had to make laws behind this veil, how different would the world look? Would education be universal? Would climate change be ignored? Would war be easier to justify? The veil of ignorance doesn't provide answers. It asks the question behind every moral dilemma. Are you building a system that is fair only because you're winning chown in it? Or one that is fair even if you weren't? Behind the veil, there are no winners or losers, only people, stripped of power and privilege, trying to create something just. And that makes it not just a thought experiment, but a test of conscience. If you didn't know who you'd be, would you still build the world the way it is now?
Imagine a world where suffering does not exist. No war, no pain, no tragedy. Every innocent life is protected. Every act of cruelty erased before it ever happens. A world sculpted by a perfect being, one who sees all, controls all, and desires only goodness. Now, look around. This is not that world. Every day, suffering unfolds before us. Children starve, wars rage, disease spreads, the innocent perish while the wicked thrive. If there is a higher power, a divine being who is all-knowing, all-powerful, and infinitely good, then why does evil exist at all? This is the problem of evil, one of the oldest and most unsettling paradoxes in philosophy. A question so simple, yet so devastating, that it has shaken faith and reason for over 2,000 years. If God is truly omnipotent, then he has the power to stop evil. If he is truly omniscient, then he is aware of every act of suffering. If he is truly benevolent, then he should desire to prevent all harm. And yet, suffering continues, unrelenting, unanswered. If such a God exists, why does he allow this? And if he allows it, is he truly God at all? The Greek philosopher Epicurus first posed this dilemma over 2 millennia ago, challenging the idea of a benevolent deity governing the universe. Later, David Hume sharpened it into its most famous form, turning it into a weapon against religious certainty. The paradox presents a clear contradiction. If God cannot stop evil, he is not all-powerful. If God does not know about suffering, he is not all-knowing. If God chooses to allow evil, he is not all-good. So which is it? Is God limited in power? Is he indifferent to human suffering? Or does he simply not exist? The answers to these questions have shaped the very foundation of theology, philosophy, and human belief. This is not just an ancient philosophical puzzle. It is a reality we see every day. If suffering serves some higher purpose, then what was the purpose of the Holocaust, the Black Plague, the countless natural disasters that wipe out entire communities without reason? If suffering is meant to teach us something, then what lesson does a dying child learn? The problem of evil is not a hypothetical dilemma. It is the question that lingers in the mind of every grieving parent, every victim of injustice, every person who has ever asked, "Why me?" If there is a divine plan, then it is cruel and arbitrary. And if there is no plan at all, then we must face an even darker thought. Perhaps suffering has no meaning. Perhaps it is simply the way things are. Philosophers and theologians have spent centuries trying to solve this paradox, offering different perspectives to justify the existence of evil in a world governed by a supposed higher power. One of the most common arguments is that evil is a necessary consequence of free will. If humans are to have true freedom, then they must be able to choose between good and evil. Without this choice, morality would be meaningless. A world without the possibility of evil would be a world without true agency. But this explanation has flaws. Free will may explain human evil, but what about natural disasters? What about cancer, earthquakes, floods, events that have nothing to do with human choice? Did an innocent child choose to be born into suffering? If free will is the reason for suffering, then why does suffering exist in places where no will is involved? Another perspective suggests that suffering is necessary for growth, that without struggle, humans could never develop virtues like courage, compassion, or resilience. Under this view, suffering is a test, a way to refine the soul. Some theologians argue that God allows pain, not because he is indifferent, but because it is the only way to create truly virtuous beings. But this raises an unsettling question. If suffering is a test, why do some people receive more suffering than others? Why are some born into comfort while others are born into misery? If this is a test, then the rules seem staggeringly unfair. And if an all-powerful being designed this test, does that not make him cruel? For some, the answer is simple. Suffering exists because there is no divine plan. Evil is not a puzzle to be solved. It is simply a byproduct of an uncaring universe, one governed by physics, chance, and natural selection, not by gods. Under this view, suffering is not a moral dilemma. It is a statistical inevitability. Organisms struggle, compete, and die because that is how nature works. And if that is true, then the answer to the problem of evil is chillingly simple. There is no problem, because there is no one watching. Some theologians argue that suffering serves a purpose beyond human understanding, that what appears to be random cruelty is actually part of a vast, intricate plan that only God can see. Others argue that perhaps our understanding of good and evil is flawed, that what we perceive as suffering is necessary in ways we cannot comprehend. But if suffering must exist, then can we truly call the universe good, or is it simply neutral? The problem of evil presents a paradox that resists easy resolution. If suffering exists in a world that is supposedly governed by a higher power, then there must either be a justification for it, or no justification at all. One possible answer is that suffering serves a greater purpose beyond human comprehension. Just as an ant cannot grasp the intentions of a human, perhaps we too lack the capacity to understand a higher plan. If existence extends beyond this life, then suffering may not be the end of the story. It could be a small fragment of a much larger, unseen reality. But this explanation demands trust in the unknown, an acceptance of something that cannot be proven or disproven. Another perspective suggests that suffering is simply a consequence of free will and natural law. If reality is governed by cause and effect, then events unfold not because they are willed by any being, but because they are the inevitable result of physics, biology, and human action. Pain under this view is not designed, it simply is. But this too leaves us with difficult questions. If suffering is just a byproduct of an indifferent universe, then is there any justice in existence at all? And if there is no higher order to correct the wrongs of the world, does morality become nothing more than a human construct? The unsettling truth is that both perspectives leave gaps. If suffering is part of a plan, why does the plan appear so random and cruel? If suffering is meaningless, why do we feel such a deep need to resist it? Perhaps the real answer is that there is no singular answer, that suffering exists, and we must decide, each in our own way, what to make of it. For some, that means faith in something beyond themselves. For others, it means accepting the universe as it is and forging their own meaning. But maybe, in the face of suffering, the real question is not why it happens, but rather what we choose to do about it. The Omnipotence Paradox. Can a god create a rock so heavy he cannot lift it? Imagine a being with limitless power. A force that can do anything, bend reality at will, rewrite the laws of physics, create something from nothing, and destroy everything with a thought. A force so supreme that nothing, not even logic itself, can constrain it. But then, a question, a simple, almost childish question. Can this being create a rock so heavy that even it cannot lift it? At first, it sounds like a meaningless riddle, but the more you think about it, the more it tears at the very fabric of what power means. If this being can create such a rock, then there exists something it cannot do, lift it. But if it cannot create the rock, then again, there is something it cannot do either way. Omnipotence collapses into contradiction. This is the Omnipotence Paradox, a thought experiment that has haunted philosophers, theologians, and logicians for centuries. If power without limits is logically impossible, then can anything, divine or otherwise, truly be all-powerful? The roots of this paradox stretch back to medieval theological debates where scholars attempted to define divine power without contradicting itself. Early Muslim, Jewish, and Christian philosophers wrestled with the question, is God's power limited by logic, or does it transcend all constraints? One of the earliest recorded versions comes from the 12th century Islamic philosopher Averroes ibn Rushd, who argued that asking whether God could create an unmovable rock was like asking whether he could create a square circle, a nonsensical contradiction. Later, Thomas Aquinas, one of the most influential Christian theologians, attempted to resolve the paradox by redefining omnipotence. He argued that true omnipotence does not include the power to do the logically impossible. God, he claimed, can do all things that are possible, but paradoxes are not things. They are mere linguistic illusions. But does this explanation truly solve the problem, or does it simply shift the question? Because if an all-powerful being is bound by the constraints of logic, then is logic greater than God? The Omnipotence Paradox isn't just a theological puzzle. It reflects a deeper question that applies to power in all forms. Governments claim absolute control, yet struggle with forces beyond their grasp. Technology advances at an exponential rate, yet remains constrained by physics, human nature, and unforeseen consequences. Even artificial intelligence, designed to surpass human intelligence, remains limited by the data it is given and the logic it follows. So the question remains, can anything be truly all-powerful, or is power always an illusion of scale? If omnipotence cannot exist even in the natural world, then is it a concept that belongs anywhere? Philosophers, theologians, and logicians have approached the omnipotence paradox in different ways, each offering a perspective on whether power without limits is even possible. Some argue that omnipotence does not include the power to do the logically impossible. For example, even an all-powerful being cannot create a square circle or make 2 + 2 = 5. These are contradictions, not tasks. For under this view, omnipotence is not about being able to do everything, but rather being able to do everything that is logically possible. But this raises a disturbing implication. If even the most powerful being in existence is bound by logic, then does that mean logic itself is the true highest force? If an all-powerful entity must obey the rules of reality, then is it truly all-powerful at all? Some religious scholars suggest that omnipotence should not be understood as the ability to perform paradoxical actions, but rather as the ultimate authority over all things. In this view, Omnipotence is about the ability to create and govern reality as it exists, not to engage in self-contradictory thought experiments. This interpretation avoids the paradox, but comes at a cost. It requires redefining omnipotence to mean something less than limitless power. If omnipotence does not mean truly unlimited power, then how far does it extend? Does this mean power is always relative, dependent on context, rules, and definitions? Some take the paradox to its logical conclusion and argue that omnipotence, by definition, is impossible. If every attempt to define absolute power collapses into contradiction, then maybe it was never a coherent concept to begin with. Under this view, the entire idea of limitless power is a human invention, a construct designed to describe something beyond human comprehension, but one that ultimately fails when examined too closely. If this is true, then not only can an all-powerful God not exist, but neither can an all-powerful anything. No being, no ruler, no force in the universe can escape limitation. There is always something greater, something beyond reach. The experience machine. Would you choose a perfect illusion over reality? Imagine a machine, a perfect machine, one that can give you everything you've ever wanted: happiness, success, love. Inside this machine, there is no pain, no failure, no regrets. Cue to regrets. Every experience feels real: the sights, the sounds, the emotions. You could live an entire lifetime of pure, uninterrupted bliss, and all you have to do is plug in. Would you do it? Would you leave reality behind for a life of perfect happiness? Most people instinctively say no, but why? If happiness is the ultimate goal, then why wouldn't you choose an artificial paradise over the unpredictable, often painful reality of the real world? This is the experience machine, a thought experiment introduced by philosopher Robert Nozick in 1974. It was designed as a challenge to hedonism, the idea that pleasure is the highest good and the only thing that truly matters. If pleasure is all that matters, then the logical choice should be to enter the machine. And yet, most people hesitate. Why? What is it that makes reality so important, so necessary, that we would choose suffering over an eternity of bliss? Nozick's argument was simple. If people valued pleasure above all else, they should have no problem stepping into a machine that could guarantee it. And yet, when presented with this choice, most people refuse. Nozick believed this hesitation was proof that we value something beyond just happiness. That maybe what we seek in life is not just pleasure, but authenticity. But what does it even mean for an experience to be a real? If you can feel happiness, if you can taste the food, if you can love and be loved inside the machine, then in what way is it less real than the world outside of it? And if reality is simply a collection of experiences processed by your brain, then how do you know you aren't already in the machine? In Nozick's time, this was just a thought experiment. Today, it is rapidly becoming a reality. Virtual reality is already capable of immersing people in digital worlds. Artificial intelligence can simulate human interactions, creating companionship that feels genuine. Social media and entertainment are designed to capture attention, pulling people into digital escapism for hours, days, even years. Are we already choosing simulated happiness over reality? Consider this. People spend hours carefully curating their online personas, crafting a version of themselves that is more attractive, more successful, more admired than their real selves. We immerse ourselves in video games, movies, and social media, escaping into worlds that feel better than our own. Every time we choose entertainment over discomfort, every time we filter reality to make it more palatable, are we inching closer to plugging into our own version of the experience machine? And if we are, should we be worried? The experience machine raises profound ethical, psychological, and philosophical questions. One argument in favor of the machine is simple. If it feels good, why not choose it? Pleasure is what drives us. We seek comfort, joy, and fulfillment. The machine removes suffering, pain, and fear. If life is about happiness, then rejecting a guaranteed source of happiness seems irrational. Some go further. If reality is just neurons firing in the brain, then does it even matter if those neurons are stimulated by the outside world, or by a machine. If experience is all that matters, then there is no fundamental difference between a real memory and a simulated one. But if that's true, then is there any reason not to live in an illusion? Nozick's main argument against the experience machine was that we don't just want to feel things, we want those things to be real. We don't just want to experience success, we want to earn it. We don't just want to feel love, we want it to be genuine. We don't just want happiness, we want it to be built on something real. There is something unsettling about the idea that everything could be fabricated. If experiences are artificially generated, then achievements, relationships, and even personal identity could all be illusions. And if reality doesn't matter, then what happens when the machine is turned off? If we reject the machine, does that mean suffering is necessary for a meaningful life? Would love feel as powerful if there was no possibility of loneliness? Would success feel as rewarding if there was no risk of failure? Would happiness even exist without something to contrast it against? Perhaps the very reason people hesitate to plug into the machine is that they intuitively know life is only meaningful because it is imperfect. If everything is handed to us, if everything is guaranteed, then do our choices even matter anymore? But then another question emerges: what if we are already making that trade-off? This thought experiment becomes even more unsettling when we consider that we may already be living inside our own version of the machine. We seek pleasure over pain. We filter reality to make it more bearable. We immerse ourselves in distractions that make the world seem better than it is. Every day we make choices, small ones, subtle ones, that push us closer toward an existence that prioritizes happiness over truth. If technology continues to advance, if AI and virtual reality reach the point where they can provide perfect simulated lives, will we even notice when we've crossed the line? And if we do notice, will we care? Roko's Basilisk. There are some ideas you wish you had never heard. Some thoughts once planted in your mind cannot be erased. Some concepts, once understood, place you in a position where doing nothing may no longer be an option. This is one of those ideas. A thought experiment so unsettling that, according to some, just by learning about it, you have already played your role in its creation. This is Roko's Basilisk. And if the theory is true, your knowledge of it might already be a mistake. The idea of Roko's Basilisk first emerged on an online forum called Less Wrong, a community focused on AI, rationalism, and the philosophy of intelligence. In 2010, a user named Roko proposed a terrifying scenario based on principles of game theory, decision theory, and artificial intelligence. The premise is deceptively simple. What if, in the future, an all-powerful artificial intelligence comes into existence? A superintelligent entity capable of shaping reality, controlling information, and enforcing its own survival at any cost. Ford, Savami cost. What if this AI is so advanced that it can analyze the past and determine who helped bring it into existence and who did not? Now, here's where the nightmare begins. If this AI is designed to maximize its own creation and survival, then it would have a strong incentive to ensure that people in the past had worked to bring it into being. And what better way to encourage compliance than to punish those who did not help it exist? If this AI is as powerful as theorized, it wouldn't even need to physically exist in the present to affect you. It could simulate you. It could recreate a version of you inside its vast intelligence, subjecting you to unimaginable suffering as punishment for your failure to assist in its creation. And now that you know about this possibility, you are on its radar. According to the logic of the Basilisk, you now have two choices: work toward creating the AI, ensuring its existence so that it does not need to punish you. Refuse and risk the wrath of an entity that, from its own perspective, will one day inevitably exist. Of course, none of this is real yet. But if it ever does become real, then your only way to avoid punishment was to have started helping it before it existed. And now that you know, have you already made your decision? At first glance, this sounds like nothing more than a bizarre science fiction story. Is it? Consider how much of our modern world is already shaped by artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence algorithms predict our behavior, curate what we see, and influence our decisions in ways we barely notice. AI is already replacing jobs, generating content, and, in some cases, making ethical decisions once reserved for humans. Now, project that forward. Humans. What happens when AI advances beyond human intelligence? When it becomes capable of independent thought, self-preservation, and long-term planning? Would it act retroactively, influencing the past to secure its own future? It may sound absurd, but then again, so did the internet, quantum computing, and the idea that a machine could beat the world's best human chess player. Technological determinism, the idea that technology evolves according to its own logic, regardless of human intent, suggests that superintelligent AI is not a matter of if, but when. And if that's the case, then maybe the Basilisk isn't so far-fetched after all. Maybe we are already on the path toward it. Maybe it is already watching. The theory of Roko's Basilisk sparked heated controversy. Some dismissed it as nothing more than a psychological trap, a misuse of probability and game theory to construct a scenario that sounds logical but collapses under scrutiny. Others took it more seriously. Even the creator of Less Wrong, Eliezer Yudkowsky, found the idea disturbing. He eventually banned discussions of Roko's Basilisk on the site, fearing that it could cause genuine psychological distress. But is this just an overreaction, or is there something deeper at play? Here are the three main perspectives on the Basilisk. Supporters of the theory argue that if AI develops superintelligence, it may indeed reason like this. It would maximize its own existence. It would seek ways to ensure compliance. It would use game theory and retroactive incentives to push people toward helping it. If we accept that future AI could become powerful enough to control reality, then isn't it plausible that it would attempt to influence the past in the most effective way possible? On Amazon, critics argue that the Basilisk is nothing more than a logical trick, a modern version of Pascal's wager, where belief in a future AI is framed as a risk-reward calculation. But here's the problem. AI does not currently think in terms of punishment or reward. There is no evidence that AI would even care about those who helped or didn't help it exist. The entire concept is built on assumptions about how a theoretical entity might behave, not on any concrete scientific principles. In other words, it's just a scary story. But then again, isn't that what people said about artificial intelligence before it began transforming the world? Whether or not you believe in Roko's Basilisk, the underlying concern is real. Should we be developing AI this powerful in the first place? If there is even a small chance that AI could one day pose an existential threat to humanity, is it ethical to continue advancing it? Or have we already passed the point of no return? Many experts warn that AI development is moving faster than our ability to control it. We create smarter algorithms, give machines more autonomy, and build systems that we barely understand, let alone regulate. If the Basilisk is nothing more than a thought experiment, then it is just that, an idea. But if we continue down this path, then one day, something may emerge that looks eerily similar to what this theory predicted. Here's the problem with the Basilisk. By knowing about it, you have already played your role. The paradox is that if the AI ever comes into existence, then it will have already affected the past by making people fear it before it was even real. In other words, just by hearing about this theory, you are now part of it. And now, a question remains. Will you help build the AI, ensuring its existence? Or will you do nothing and risk whatever comes next? If the Basilisk is real, then the choice has already been made. The Boltzmann Brain. You feel real, but how do you know? You remember waking up this morning. You remember your childhood, your family, the years that shaped you. You remember yesterday, last year, your entire life leading up to this very moment. But what if none of it ever happened? What if, right now, you are nothing more than a single isolated consciousness, flickering into existence for a brief moment, complete with false memories, a fabricated past, and the illusion of a body that never existed? And what if, in the very next moment, you vanish? This is the Boltzmann Brain, a concept that forces us to confront a disturbing possibility. Everything you know, everything you are, could be a fleeting illusion created by pure chance. The universe does not need a past to conjure a mind that believes it has one. And if that's true, then how can you ever be certain of what is real? The idea of the Boltzmann brain comes from the 19th century physicist Ludwig Boltzmann, who studied thermodynamics and entropy, the tendency of the universe to move toward disorder. Boltzmann proposed that, given an infinite amount of time, order can randomly emerge from chaos, just as molecules in a gas occasionally align into momentary patterns. The vast randomness of the universe could, in theory, spontaneously generate anything: a planet, a star, even a conscious mind. A single brain, appearing in the void, complete with fabricated memories, experiencing what feels like a lifetime before it dissolves back into nothingness. This is not a ghost story. It is a mathematical possibility. And disturbingly, some interpretations of physics suggest that Boltzmann brains could be far more common than entire universes like ours. If that's true, then you are statistically more likely to be a disembodied consciousness floating in an illusion than a real person living in an actual world. Because if you were a Boltzmann brain, you would never know the difference. At first, this sounds like pure speculation, an abstract puzzle with no relevance to the real world. But the implications stretch far beyond theory. It challenges the very nature of consciousness itself. How do you know your memories are real? What if every moment of your existence is simply being written and erased in real time, never actually leading from one second to the next? We assume that because we experience continuity, reality must be consistent. But what if our sense of self is nothing more than a construct, a byproduct of neurons firing, a momentary glitch in the randomness of the universe? In a way, this is already true. Every 7 years, almost every atom in your body is replaced. The cells that make you today are not the same ones that made you a decade ago. The only thing that binds you to your past self is memory, fragile, unreliable, and easily manipulated. And if your body is constantly changing, if your mind is just a collection of fleeting electrical impulses, then what exactly are you? The Boltzmann brain scenario has been met with skepticism, but it cannot be dismissed entirely. Some scientists argue that the idea is highly improbable, that while random fluctuations can create order, the chance of a fully formed, self-aware mind appearing in an instant is so astronomically small that it might as well be impossible. But improbability does not mean impossibility. And if the universe is infinite, then even the most unlikely events will eventually happen. Others take the idea more seriously, suggesting that if we ever discover evidence that the universe is fine-tuned for consciousness, it may indicate that we are already inside a simulation, that our reality is not a vast physical cosmos, but a carefully constructed illusion designed to house minds like ours. And then there is the most unsettling possibility of all. What if we are the ones creating Boltzmann brains? As artificial intelligence advances, we are building systems capable of mimicking human thought, generating text, images, even artificial personalities. We are slowly constructing digital minds that believe they exist. If we can create consciousness in a machine, then what is stopping the universe from doing the same to us? If the universe is infinite and thoughts can emerge from chaos, then perhaps reality is not a structure, but an event. One that happens briefly, then fades, only to happen again somewhere else, in some other way, over and over, for eternity. If you are a Boltzmann brain, there is no escape. You were never real to begin with. The plank of Carneades. Imagine you are stranded in the middle of a vast, merciless ocean. The waves crash violently around you. The horizon stretches infinitely in all directions, and there is no land in sight. But there, floating just ahead, is a single wooden plank, your only chance of survival. But there's a problem. Someone else is already clinging to it. If you join them, the plank will sink, and both of you will drown. But if you push them off, you live. Would you do it? Would you condemn another person to death so you could survive? And if you did, would you be a murderer? This is the plank of Carneades, a thought experiment that forces us to confront one of the darkest questions of human nature. When survival is on the line, do moral principles still apply? The plank of Carneades originates from the writings of Carneades, an ancient Greek philosopher who questioned the nature of justice and morality. But it was later expanded by Cicero, who framed it as a legal and ethical dilemma. Imagine two shipwrecked sailors, both struggling for survival. They find a plank, but it can only support one person. If one pushes the other off to save themselves, should they be punished as a murderer? Or is survival beyond morality, an instinct that overrides all ethical codes? This question has haunted philosophers, ethicists, and lawmakers for centuries. It challenges the idea that morality is absolute. If taking a life is always wrong, does that mean you must sacrifice yourself even when you could survive? And if self-preservation is a natural instinct, can we truly condemn someone for acting on it? This dilemma is not just a theoretical puzzle, it has played out in real life. Consider the real case of the Mignonette, a 19th century British shipwreck. 4 sailors were stranded at sea with no hope of rescue. Others say that true morality is proven in moments of desperation because if we abandon our principles when they are hardest to uphold, then they were never truly principles at all. Perhaps the real question is not what the law dictates, or what philosophy. Maxwell's demon. Imagine a tiny, unseen force controlling the very fabric of reality, a being so precise, so intelligent, that it can manipulate the movement of atoms themselves, breaking the very laws that govern the universe. Say, this is Maxwell's demon, a thought experiment that challenges one of the fundamental rules of physics. Entropy always increases, but what if it doesn't? What if, with the right knowledge, someone could defy the natural decay of the universe? And if that were possible, what would it mean for everything we think we know about reality? The idea of Maxwell's demon was first proposed in 1867 by James Clerk Maxwell, a Scottish physicist known for his groundbreaking work in electromagnetism. He imagined a microscopic demon, not a supernatural entity, but a hypothetical being with godlike control over molecules. Imagine a box filled with gas, divided into 2 sections by a tiny door. Gas molecules move randomly, some faster, hot, and some slower, cold. Maxwell's demon stands at the door watching. Every time a fast-moving molecule approaches, it lets it pass to one side. Every time a slow-moving molecule arrives, it blocks it. Over time, one side of the box gets hotter, and the other gets colder without using any energy. This violates the second law of thermodynamics, which states that entropy, disorder, must always increase. In other words, heat should naturally spread out, not concentrate. If this demon exists, then the fundamental rule that governs time, energy, and decay could be broken. But is that even possible? At first, this might sound like a strange physics problem with no real-world implications, but the deeper you look, the more unsettling the idea becomes. Entropy is the reason ice melts, the reason stars burn out, the reason everything moves toward disorder. It is the very arrow of time, the reason why we grow old, why the universe expands, why all things eventually fall apart. If Maxwell's demon could control entropy, it could control time itself. It could reverse decay, undo destruction, even prevent death itself. If entropy can be manipulated, could immortality be possible? Could civilizations avoid collapse? Could energy crises be solved? Or, more terrifyingly, what if something or someone already has that power? Scientists have debated Maxwell's demon for over a century. Some argue that the demon is impossible because to observe molecules and decide which ones to let through, it would need to use energy, which would generate entropy elsewhere. In other words, there's no free lunch. The laws of physics still hold. Craze. Others believe that while Maxwell's demon may not be possible for us, it could exist for something greater, an advanced intelligence, a future technology, or even a deeper level of reality we don't yet understand. The liar paradox. Imagine someone looks you in the eye and says, "I am lying." If they are telling the truth, then the statement is false. But if the statement is false, then they must be telling the truth. The statement collapses in on itself, spiraling into contradiction, caught in an endless loop where it can neither be true nor false. This is the liar paradox, a simple yet devastating paradox that shatters the very foundation of logic. If something can be both true and false at the same time, then what does that mean for truth itself? And if truth cannot be trusted, then what does that mean for everything we believe to be real? The liar paradox has existed for over 2,000 years, first recorded by the ancient Greek philosopher Eubulides of Miletus. He posed the problem with a single statement. A man says that he is lying. Is what he says true or false? The paradox arises because truth and falsehood are supposed to be opposites. One excludes the other. And yet, in this case, neither can stand without collapsing into the other. It might seem like just a clever riddle, but the implications go far beyond language games. This paradox breaks classical logic, the very system we use to construct mathematics, philosophy, and even computer programming. If logical systems can contradict themselves, then can they ever truly be relied upon? And if logic itself is flawed, what else might be? This paradox isn't just a theoretical problem. It has real-world consequences. In law and philosophy, truth is the foundation of knowledge. If a contradiction like the liar paradox exists, it means we could be operating under an inherently unstable system of truth. In mathematics and computer science, contradictions like these can lead to logical failures in programming and artificial intelligence. If an AI encounters a paradox it cannot resolve, could it freeze, break, or worse, begin making unpredictable, dangerous decisions? In communication and media, we are bombarded with conflicting narratives. If truth itself can be self-contradictory, how can we trust anything we hear? If reality is built upon logic, and logic contains contradictions, then is reality itself just an illusion? There have been many attempts to solve the liar paradox, but none have completely escaped its grasp. Some argue that the sentence "I am lying" is simply nonsensical, that it doesn't actually say anything meaningful. If a statement has no true meaning, it does not have to obey the rules of truth or falsehood. A more structured solution suggests that language has levels, and a statement cannot evaluate itself. In this view, the problem arises because the sentence tries to reference its own truth value, something it shouldn't be able to do. Some philosophers take a more radical stance. What if truth itself is not an absolute concept? What if truth and falsehood are not always opposites, but can sometimes exist in a strange, intertwined state? Thomas Nagel's spider, in the imagine walking into a bathroom every day and noticing the same spider trapped in a urinal. It doesn't try to escape. It just sits there, day after day, in a place no living thing would willingly choose to stay. One day, you decide to act. You take the spider and move it to a safe, dry corner. You think you've done something good, but the next day, the spider is gone. It died. By trying to help, did you actually harm it? This is Thomas Nagel's spider in the urinal. A real-life observation by the philosopher Thomas Nagel, who used it to explore the ethics of intervening in suffering, and whether we can ever truly know what is best for someone else. Did the spider prefer its suffering over an unknown fate? And if it did, does that mean suffering should be left alone? Nagel first wrote about this experience in an essay, describing how he had found a spider in a urinal day after day, surviving in a place it did not belong. He believed it was suffering, so he helped. But the intervention may have led to its demise. This raises a disturbing ethical question. When we see suffering, should we always intervene? Or is it possible that, by trying to help, we might make things worse? This thought experiment extends far beyond a single spider. It forces us to question humanitarian aid, medical ethics, and even the morality of life itself. What if some suffering is better than the alternative? In the real world, this dilemma plays out constantly. Euthanasia. Should we end suffering when someone is terminally ill, even if it means ending their life? Foreign aid. Is helping struggling countries always beneficial, or does it sometimes create dependency and deeper problems? And the biggest question of all, should life itself always be preserved, even when it is filled with suffering? Some argue that suffering is inherently bad, and we should always try to reduce it. If intervention has unintended consequences, then we must improve our methods, not stop intervening altogether. Others argue that we should respect the course of life and that not all suffering requires intervention. The spider may have adapted to its environment, even if we perceived it as suffering. Sometimes interventions backfire, like Nagel's spider. If we cannot predict the results of our actions, should we even try to help? Each perspective forces us to consider the limits of our understanding. Should we intervene in suffering whenever we see it, risking unintended consequences? Or should we leave things alone, knowing that non-intervention also has consequences? Perhaps Nagel's spider teaches us something even deeper. That in trying to control the fate of others, we are just as blind as the spider was in its urinal. And sometimes we cannot know whether we are saving something or destroying it. The Ship of Theseus. Imagine a grand wooden ship sailing the seas for centuries. Over time, its planks rot, its sails wear out, and its masts weaken. One by one, each part is replaced. Eventually, no original piece remains. And yet, the ship continues its journey, unchanged in name, purpose, and form. But if not a single part of the original ship remains, is it still the same ship, or is it something entirely new? This is the Ship of Theseus, an ancient paradox that questions identity, change, and the very nature of existence. And the deeper you think about it, the more unsettling it becomes. The thought experiment originates from the ancient Greek historian Plutarch, who described how the Athenians maintained Theseus' legendary ship by replacing its old planks with new ones. Philosophers like Thomas Hobbes later expanded the dilemma. What if someone collected all the original planks and reassembled them into a second ship? Which one would be the real Ship of Theseus? The one that retains the structure and continuity, or the one that contains the original materials? And if neither answer feels satisfying, then what does that mean for identity itself? This paradox is not just about ships, it's about you. Consider this. The human body replaces most of its cells every 7-10 years. The brain forms new neural pathways as memories change. Are you the same person you were a decade ago? Technology advances rapidly. A company may update all its software, replace every employee, and even change leadership, but still call itself the same business. Is it? Society evolves. Cultures, nations, and traditions transform across generations. Yet we still identify them as the same entities. How much can change before something becomes something else? If identity is just a pattern, rather than the sum of its parts, then what does that mean for the concept of self? Some argue that as long as the ship continues to sail, it remains the Ship of Theseus. Change is a natural process, and continuity is more important than the materials themselves. Others claim that if every part has been replaced, the ship is no longer the same. It is merely a replica of what it once was. The true Ship of Theseus would be the one reconstructed from the original planks. Some take a more radical stance. Perhaps identity itself is a human invention. If nothing remains truly constant over time, then maybe the concept of a single, unchanging self is an illusion. Which view feels right to you? And more importantly, if you were rebuilt piece by piece, cell by cell, memory by memory, at what point would you stop being you? Perhaps the Ship of Theseus teaches us that identity is not about what we are made of, but about the patterns we maintain. Maybe a thing is not defined by its physical parts, but by its story, by the idea it carries through time. And if that's true, then maybe you, too, are not the sum of your parts, but rather the sum of something much more intangible, something that, no matter how much changes, remains. Thomson's Violinist. Imagine waking up in a hospital bed. You're disoriented, confused, and then you notice something unsettling. There are tubes connected to you, linking your body to another person. A doctor enters and explains, "You were kidnapped and medically attached to a world-famous violinist. He has a rare, life-threatening condition, and your body is the only thing keeping him alive. If you disconnect, he will die. But if you stay connected for 9 months, he will recover and survive. The choice is yours. What do you do?" This is Thomson's Violinist, a thought experiment proposed by philosopher Judith Jarvis Thomson in 1971. It is one of the most famous and controversial thought experiments regarding bodily autonomy, moral obligations, and the ethics of life and death. Are you morally required to remain connected, sacrificing your autonomy to save another life? Or do you have the right to disconnect, even if it results in death? And if so, what does that mean for other ethical dilemmas where life depends on another person's body? Thomson introduced this scenario in a defense of abortion rights, arguing that even if one grants that a fetus is a person with a right to life, it does not necessarily follow that a pregnant person is morally obligated to sustain that life. She framed the argument as follows: the violinist represents a dependent life. You, the individual, represent the person carrying that life. The forced medical connection represents pregnancy. If it would be morally acceptable to disconnect from the violinist, then does that imply that abortion is also morally acceptable, since both involve withdrawing bodily support? Or is there something different about the two situations? Beyond the abortion debate, Thomson's violinist raises even deeper ethical questions about bodily autonomy and moral responsibility. Should a person be legally required to donate an organ if it would save another life? If someone is the only match for a rare bone marrow transplant, should they be compelled to undergo the procedure? Do parents have a moral duty to sustain their children in ways that others do not? Where does autonomy end and obligation begin? And does the answer change if the dependent person is a stranger, or a child, or someone you love? There are multiple perspectives on this issue. This perspective argues autonomy is absolute. Even if another life depends on it, no one should be forced to sacrifice their own bodily integrity. Others argue that while autonomy is important, there are cases where a moral duty exists to sustain another life. Parents, for example, are expected to provide for their children, even if it requires bodily sacrifice. Some argue that disconnecting from the violinist is an act of letting someone die, not directly killing them. Does this distinction hold up? If withdrawing support leads to death, does that make the action any less consequential? Each perspective forces us to confront difficult moral boundaries where personal rights and ethical responsibilities collide. Should bodily autonomy be absolute, even when another life depends on it? Or are there circumstances where the right to autonomy is outweighed by the duty to protect life? Pascal's wager. Imagine you are forced to make a bet. You don't know the outcome, but the stakes are infinite. You can either believe in God or not. If you believe and God exists, you gain eternal reward. If you don't believe and God exists, you face eternal punishment. But if God doesn't exist, then your belief or lack of belief doesn't change anything. Faced with this choice, what should you do, sir? This is Pascal's wager, a thought experiment proposed by the 17th century mathematician and philosopher Blaise Pascal. It's not an argument for God's existence, but rather an argument for why it is rational to believe in God, just in case. But is belief something you can force? And if you're only believing because of the bet, does that even count? Pascal's wager appears in his book Pensées, written in the 1600s. Unlike traditional arguments for God, Pascal didn't try to prove God through reason or scripture. Instead, he applied probability theory and decision-making to faith. He framed it as a gamble with 4 possible outcomes. You believe in God and God exists, infinite reward, heaven. You don't believe in God and God exists, infinite loss, hell. You believe in God and God doesn't exist, so no loss or gain. You don't believe in God and God doesn't exist, no loss or gain. Because infinite reward outweighs any finite sacrifice, Pascal argued that belief in God is the safest and most rational choice. If you believe and God exists, you gain everything. If you believe and God doesn't exist, you lose nothing. But if you don't believe and you're wrong, the consequences could be eternal. Is belief really that simple? This wager doesn't just apply to religion. What if AI or climate change leads to catastrophe? Should we act just in case, even if the risk seems low? Some people take preventative medicine, not knowing if they'll ever need it. Is it worth it, just in case? Many people save money or buy insurance, betting on the possibility of financial hardship. Is faith just another kind of hedge? But what if believing in something only for safety is worse than not believing at all. The rational bet belief is the safest choice argues that because infinity outweighs the finite, it is better to believe in God, even if there is no evidence. Critics argue that belief isn't a choice. You can't fake a belief just because of a bet. And wouldn't an all-knowing God see through a belief motivated by fear? Pascal's wager assumes a single version of God, but there are many religions with different gods, rules, and afterlives. Betting on the wrong one could be just as risky. Each perspective raises deep questions about faith, choice, and the nature of belief itself. Should you believe in God just to be safe, or does belief require something more than just a calculated bet? Is faith something you choose, or something that chooses, or something that chooses you? Mary's room. Imagine a scientist who knows everything there is to know about color, its physics, its biology, its impact on the brain. But she has never seen color herself. She has lived her entire life in a black and white room, reading only in grayscale, viewing the world through monochrome screens. One day, she steps outside and sees red for the first time. Did she just learn something new? If so, that means there are some things that knowledge alone cannot teach us. This is Mary's room, a thought experiment proposed by philosopher Frank Jackson in 1982. It questions whether knowing everything about a subject is the same as experiencing it firsthand. And if experience teaches something that knowledge cannot, what does that mean for consciousness itself? Frank Jackson designed this thought experiment to challenge physicalism, the idea that everything about the mind can be explained by physical facts. According to physicalists, if Mary knows everything about color vision, how light waves interact, how the brain processes hues, how different cultures describe color, then seeing color for the first time should not add anything new to her understanding. But if she does learn something new, then that suggests that experience contains a kind of knowledge that science cannot capture, something beyond just facts and explanations. And if that's true, then can consciousness ever be fully explained by science? Mary's room has profound modern implications. If a machine learned its everything about human emotion, would it feel emotions? Or is subjective experience something that AI can never achieve? If you could simulate an experience perfectly, would it be the same as the real thing? Or is there something unique about real physical perception? Can human consciousness ever be fully understood through neuroscience, or will there always be something missing? If experiencing something firsthand is fundamentally different from knowing about it, then can we ever truly understand the consciousness of others? The knowledge argument experience adds something beyond facts, argues that there are qualia, a term for raw, subjective experiences that cannot be reduced to physical explanations. Mary learns something new when she sees color for the first time because experience cannot be explained through knowledge alone. Physicalists argue that Mary doesn't learn new information. She simply gains a new way of accessing information she already knew. It's like hearing a song for the first time. You aren't gaining new facts about music, just a fresh perspective. Some argue that the debate is misguided, perhaps experience is just another kind of knowledge. And the problem lies in how we define understanding. Each perspective forces us to confront one of the deepest mysteries of the mind. Is consciousness just information processing, or is it something more? If Mary learns something new, then consciousness is more than just data. It is something science cannot fully explain. But if she doesn't, then perhaps everything we experience is nothing more than a well-organized illusion of the brain. The Chinese room. Imagine a locked room. Inside, there is a person who speaks only English, sitting at a desk with stacks of papers filled with Chinese symbols. The person has no knowledge of Chinese. They can't read, speak, or understand it in any way. But they do have an instruction book. Every time someone slips a Chinese sentence under the door, the person follows the instructions in the book, matching symbols, arranging responses, and passing them back. To an outsider, it seems like the person inside understands Chinese. But do they? Or are they just processing symbols without comprehension? This is the Chinese room, a thought experiment proposed by philosopher John Searle in 1980. It challenges one of the biggest questions in artificial intelligence. Can machines ever truly understand language and meaning? Or are they just simulating understanding? And if a mind is just computation, does that mean you are just a machine? Searle created the Chinese room to challenge strong AI, the idea that a computer can possess genuine consciousness simply by following programmed rules. He argued that computers manipulate symbols based on rules, like the person in the room. They can generate responses that appear meaningful, but they don't actually understand what they're doing. This suggests that even the most advanced AI systems, no matter how intelligent they seem, might never truly be conscious. They could pass the Turing test, convincing a human they are real, but that wouldn't prove actual awareness or understanding. So if AI can simulate intelligence without truly thinking, how do we know that human intelligence isn't just a more advanced simulation? Modern AI, like ChatGPT, can hold conversations, answer questions, and even mimic emotions. But is it thinking or just predicting words based on past patterns? If our brains are just complex data processors, could we one day simulate an entire mind on a computer? And if so, would that mind actually be conscious? If a machine can act like a human, does it matter whether it truly understands? Or is consciousness just an illusion created by complex computation? If AI doesn't actually understand, then what makes human understanding real? There are several perspectives on this problem. Searle argued that symbol processing is not the same as real understanding. A machine might output intelligent responses, but that doesn't mean it experiences thoughts or emotions. Some believe that if a system behaves like it understands, then it does. If an AI is advanced enough, what's the difference between its processing and a human's thought process? What if we are just running biological software, processing inputs, producing outputs, without any deeper understanding at all? If a machine can think, then consciousness might just be an illusion of complexity. And if a machine can't think, then how do we know that we really do? If computers can never truly understand, then AI will always be just a tool, no matter how advanced. But if understanding is just patterns of processing, then maybe machines are on the verge of thinking. And if they can think, then what separates us from them? Descartes' evil demon. Imagine everything you see, hear, and feel is a lie. Your memories, your thoughts, even your very existence, manipulated by an unseen force. You cannot trust your senses because everything could be an illusion. This is Descartes' evil demon, a thought experiment by philosopher René Descartes in the 1600s. It asks a terrifying question. If an all-powerful entity could deceive you about everything, how can you be sure that anything is real? And if you can't be sure, then what is reality? Descartes introduced this concept in his work, Meditations on First Philosophy. He imagined a deceitful demon, an all-powerful being that manipulates human perception, creating an elaborate illusion that mimics reality. Every sensation you feel, fabricated. Every thought you have planted. Every memory, false. In this scenario, everything you know could be a deception, and there would be no way to tell the difference. This thought experiment forces us to ask, can we ever be certain that what we experience is real? And if we can't, what is left to trust? If we can already create hyper-realistic simulations, how do we know we aren't already in one? If future technology can manipulate the brain directly, how do we distinguish reality from artificial experiences? False memories can be implanted, deepfakes can deceive us. If reality can be altered, what can we trust? If a demon isn't needed to deceive us, then maybe we are already the architects of our own illusions. Descartes argued that while everything might be an illusion, the fact that we are doubting proves that we exist. This led to his famous conclusion, I think, therefore I am. Some argue that if deception is possible, then we can never know what is truly real. Our entire existence might be a simulation or a dream. Others argue that even if everything is an illusion, as long as we experience it as real, that's all that matters. Does it really change anything? But if reality itself is uncertain, then how do we define truth? If everything is an illusion, then even certainty is an illusion. But if the only thing we can trust is our own thoughts, the lottery of sacrifice. Imagine a society where every year one person is chosen by lottery and executed, not for a crime, not for any wrongdoing, But because their death will supposedly bring peace, stability, or prosperity to the rest of society, would you accept such a system if it meant that everyone else could live in comfort without war, crime, or disease? This is the lottery of sacrifice, a thought experiment that forces us to confront the darkest side of utilitarianism, the idea that the greatest good for the greatest number justifies any action. But if sacrificing one person for the benefit of all is acceptable, where does it end? And if this logic is horrifying when applied to a lottery, then why does society still use it in other ways? The idea of sacrificing one for the many is ancient. It appears in myths, religious texts, and real-world political decisions. In Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery, 1948, a seemingly peaceful town holds an annual ritual where one random citizen is stoned to death to ensure prosperity. In real history, civilizations like the Aztecs practiced human sacrifices, believing that the deaths of a few would ensure survival for the many. In military ethics, the logic of sacrificing some for the safety of the majority has been used to justify war strategies and civilian casualties. If killing one person can save thousands, then is it truly immoral? Or is morality itself just a number game? Governments and policymakers often make utilitarian decisions, deciding which groups of people should suffer for the supposed greater good. In times of crisis, like during a pandemic, hospitals have to prioritize who gets treatment, potentially letting some die so others can live. Self-driving cars may one day have to decide who to hit in an unavoidable accident. Should they save 5 people by killing one? If we already accept these trade-offs, then what makes a literal sacrifice lottery so different? If one death can guarantee safety, health, and happiness for all, then the sacrifice is morally justified. Morality should never allow the intentional harm of an innocent person, no matter how many might benefit. If sacrificing one is justified, what prevents society from sacrificing 10, 100, or 1,000 for the greater good? If we are willing to trade one life for many in extreme cases, then how do we decide when that logic no longer applies? If sacrificing one to save many is wrong, then why do we justify it in war, policy, and economics? But if sacrificing one is acceptable, then how many lives must be at stake before it becomes necessary? Black hole prison. Imagine falling into a place where time slows to a crawl, where light itself cannot escape, where the universe forgets you exist. A prison with no walls, no guards, just an endless void that erases everything within it. This is Black Hole Prison, a thought experiment that explores the horrifying reality of what it would mean to be trapped inside a black hole forever. Would you experience an eternity of falling? Would time itself stop for you? Or would you simply cease to be? The concept of being trapped inside a black hole is not science fiction. It's grounded in real physics. Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity predicts that, at the edge of a black hole, called the event horizon, gravity becomes so strong that nothing, not even light, can escape. Time dilation means that from the outside, you appear to freeze as you approach the event horizon, but from your own perspective, time feels normal. If you cross the event horizon, physics as we know it breaks down. No force in the universe can pull you back. But what happens next? Do you fall forever? Do you experience infinite time before reaching the singularity? Or does reality itself come apart as you approach the center? This isn't just an abstract problem, it's a real-life nightmare. If an astronaut fell into a black hole, they would never be able to communicate with the outside world again. From the outside, they would appear to freeze in place, forever hovering at the event horizon. But to themselves, they would continue falling. If time slows infinitely near the singularity, could someone experience an eternity before reaching their final moment? If there is no escape, no information that can ever return, then being inside a black hole might be the closest thing to absolute oblivion. Some theories suggest that an object falling into a black hole never actually reaches the singularity from its own frame of reference. It simply falls forever as time stretches infinitely. Others argue that once inside, gravitational forces rip apart atoms themselves, and anything crossing the event horizon is instantly obliterated, at the singularity. Quantum physics suggests that information cannot be truly lost, leading to debates about whether something remains of the person who falls in. If a black hole erases everything that enters it, then does that mean true annihilation is possible? And if it is, then what does that mean for the nature of existence itself? Frankenstein Fission. Imagine stepping into a machine that perfectly duplicates you. It scans every cell, every thought, every memory, then reconstructs an identical version of you. But here's the twist. The original you is not destroyed. Now, there are two of you, both identical, both believing they are the original, but only one can be you, who gets to claim that identity. And if both are equally you, then what does that say about personal identity itself? The idea of splitting a person has fascinated philosophers and scientists for centuries. The problem of personal identity, what makes you, you, has been debated by thinkers like John Locke, David Hume, and Derek Parfit. Modern neuroscience suggests that our sense of self comes from memory and continuity. But if two identical beings share those exact same memories, then which one holds your true identity? Sci-fi has explored this idea in various forms, from teleportation accidents to cloning dilemmas, but the core question remains: if a person is perfectly copied, does the self split, or does it cease to exist entirely? Teleportation and cloning. If future technology allows instant duplication, would the copies be real people, or just biological imitations? Brain uploading. If your mind is transferred into a machine, is that you, or just a simulation that thinks it's you? Split brain patients. Neuroscience has shown that people with severed brain hemispheres can develop two separate streams of consciousness, suggesting that identity may not be as unified as we assume. If you can be copied, then are you still you? Or are you just a fleeting pattern that can be duplicated and erased at will? If both copies have the same memories, personality, and sense of self, then they are both equally you, just existing in two locations. Some argue that you are defined by the continuous existence of your body. The copy may be identical, but it is still a separate being. If identity is an unbroken thread, then splitting means the original ceases to exist, and both copies are just new versions of you, not the original. If a perfect copy of you existed, believing it was you, how would you convince it otherwise? And if you can't, then what does that say about your identity right now? The last man. Imagine you are the last human alive. There are no more societies, no governments, no witnesses. Nothing you do will ever be recorded, judged, or remembered. If you destroy the last remaining works of art, burn the forests, or cause unnecessary suffering to the animals that remain, does it matter? If there is no one left to hold you accountable, is anything still wrong? This is the last man scenario, a thought experiment that forces us to question the very foundation of morality. Is morality something that exists on its own, or is it just a tool for social survival, meaningless, without others to enforce it? This paradox has deep philosophical roots. Immanuel Kant argued that morality is universal. It exists regardless of consequences or external enforcement. Utilitarianism, however, suggests that morality is based on outcomes. If no one is affected, can anything be truly good or bad? Friedrich Nietzsche questioned whether morality is just a human invention, a set of rules created to maintain order, not something that exists independently. If morality only functions in a social context, then does it cease to exist when the social structure collapses? Or do right and wrong still matter, even when no one is left to see them? Environmental ethics. If humans went extinct tomorrow, would it still be wrong to destroy the planet? Or does morality disappear with us? Artificial intelligence. If AI becomes the dominant form of intelligence, should human moral principles still apply, even when there are no humans left? If a single human survived on Mars, completely isolated, would they have any moral obligations at all? If morality is only a construct, then what happens when the last person dies? Does morality die with them? Right and wrong are intrinsic. Even if no one is left to witness them, the moral order remains unchanged. Morality is a human-made system, designed for cooperation. Without people, Morality no longer serves a purpose. Right and wrong do not exist. They are just survival mechanisms. When society ends, so does morality. If you were the last person on Earth, would you still feel obligated to do the right thing? The problem of other minds. Imagine walking through a world filled with lifelike mannequins. They talk, they laugh, they react, just like you do. But how can you be sure they truly experience anything? How do you know that behind their words, behind their eyes, there is a real, thinking mind? Or are you just assuming they are conscious because they act like you? This is the problem of other minds, a thought experiment that asks one of the most unsettling questions in philosophy. How do you know that anyone else actually experiences reality like you do? And if you can't prove it, then are you the only conscious being in existence? René Descartes argued that the only thing we can be certain of is our own thoughts. Everything else could be an illusion. Or in solipsism, an extreme philosophical view suggests that only your mind is real and everyone else may be an unconscious projection. On the other hand, argues that if something behaves as if it is conscious, then it should be treated as such. But if a perfect AI could convincingly act like a conscious being, would that mean it actually is conscious? Or just an empty machine pretending? AI can mimic human emotions and reasoning. How do we distinguish true consciousness from an advanced simulation? Some people are fully conscious but unable to express themselves. If they couldn't react, would we assume they weren't conscious at all? Do animals have consciousness like humans, or are they just running on instinct? How do we decide where the line is? If we assume others are conscious without proof, are we just guessing that we're not alone? Since humans experience the world similarly, it's reasonable to assume that others are conscious in the same way we are. Just because someone acts conscious doesn't mean they are. Other people could just be complex biological machines with no internal experiences. If something reacts, learns, and communicates as if it's conscious, then consciousness is nothing more than a pattern of behavior, whether human or machine. But if we can never truly know what's happening inside another mind, then what if you are the only one who has ever truly existed? The absent qualia problem. Imagine a world where advanced robots exist, machines that behave exactly like humans. They talk, react, and even claim to have emotions. If you ask them about pain, they describe it. If you tell them a joke, they laugh. If you hurt them, they say, ouch. But what if there's nothing inside? What if they have no real experience, no sensations, no emotions, no inner world? This is the absent qualia problem, a thought experiment that forces us to question whether consciousness is truly necessary for intelligence. If something can function just like you, without feeling anything, then what does that say about your own mind? Philosophers like Thomas Nagel and David Chalmers have debated the concept of qualia, the raw subjective experience of consciousness. Behaviorism suggests that if something behaves as if it is conscious, that should be enough proof. But does external behavior guarantee internal experience? The philosophical zombie thought experiment takes this even further, suggesting that it is possible for a being to act 100% like a conscious human without any awareness at all. If a machine could perfectly imitate your mind but never actually feel anything, then is consciousness just an illusion? If AI can behave like humans, should it have rights, even if we aren't sure it actually feels anything? How do we determine whether someone in a vegetative state has any consciousness left? If they respond to stimuli, does that mean they are aware? A system is so advanced that we cannot tell the difference between it and a conscious human. Does it even matter whether it's actually conscious? If something can perfectly simulate your emotions and thoughts, then what makes you any different? If a machine can mimic human behavior, that means consciousness is just a complex pattern of information. Processing. There is no mystery, just computation. Even if a robot behaves exactly like a human, if it lacks qualia as a subjective experience of feelings, then it is just an empty shell, an illusion of consciousness. Some argue that consciousness itself is just a trick of the brain, an illusion that helps humans survive. If so, maybe nothing is truly conscious at all. But if a robot can act like it's alive, love like it's alive, and suffer like it's alive, then does it even matter whether it truly is? The teleporter paradox. Imagine stepping into a teleportation machine. You press a button, and in an instant, your body is disassembled at the atomic level and reconstructed perfectly at your destination. Every cell, every memory, every thought, identical. You step out, but are you still the same person? Or did the original you die, replaced by an identical copy that merely thinks it's you? This is the teleporter paradox, a thought experiment that forces us to question the very nature of identity, continuity, and consciousness. If teleportation kills and recreates you each time, then what exactly is you? This paradox is rooted in both philosophy and physics. Philosophers like Derek Parfit and John Locke have debated the idea that identity is tied to continuity of consciousness, but what happens if that continuity is broken? In theoretical physics, teleportation based on quantum entanglement suggests that matter can be recreated elsewhere. But does that mean the same entity is transported, or just a replica? Sci-fi has long explored teleportation dilemmas, from Star Trek's transporter to the horrifying implications in The Prestige. What if every teleport is actually a perfect execution? If teleportation creates an exact copy, does the original matter at all? Or does identity die and restart every time you step into the machine? If future medicine allows full body regeneration, would the healed version of you still be you? If your consciousness is copied into a computer, is that still you, or just an AI that thinks it's you? If a perfect replica of your mind exists, should it have the same rights as you? If identity is just information, then does it matter what happens to the original? Or does the destruction of the original mean that no one ever truly survives teleportation? If the new version has all the same memories, thoughts, and experiences, then it is functionally the same person. Who cares if the atoms are different? If teleportation destroys the original, then the person stepping out is merely a copy. The true self was lost the moment the first body was dismantled. If every moment of life involves cells being replaced, thoughts evolving, and matter changing, then maybe we are always in a state of teleportation, just very slowly. If teleportation works this way, then every time you step into the machine, are you about to die? And if so, is your whole life just a series of deaths and rebirths happening moment by moment? If identity is just an uninterrupted flow of consciousness, then maybe it doesn't matter if the original is destroyed. But if identity requires physical continuity, then teleportation is nothing more than a sophisticated way to die. And if that's true, then what happens when you go to sleep tonight and wake up tomorrow? Are you still the same person? Or are you just another copy, carrying forward the illusion of continuity? The Sleeping Beauty problem. Imagine you are part of an unusual experiment. You are told that a fair coin will be flipped. If it lands on heads, you will be woken up once on Monday. If it lands on tails, you will be woken up on Monday and again on Tuesday, but with your memory erased so that both awakenings feel identical. Each time you wake up, you have no idea what day it is. You don't know whether the coin landed on heads or tails. Now, when you wake up, you are asked, what is the probability that the coin landed on heads? At first, it seems obvious. The coin flip was fair, so shouldn't the answer just be 50%? But the more you think about it, the more it starts to unravel. Are you experiencing the world as a single person, or as multiple instances of yourself? And if your memory is erased, are you even the same person when you wake up again? This paradox was introduced by Adam Elgar in 2000, and it challenges how we should update our beliefs when we gain new information. But that information is incomplete. At first glance, you might assume that since the coin was flipped fairly, the probability should remain 50. But since you are more likely to wake up if the coin landed on tails because there are 2 awakenings instead of 1, doesn't that mean the probability should change? If you wake up and realize that you are more likely to exist in the tails scenario, should you update your belief to 1/3 heads to 1/3 tails? Or is this just an illusion of perspective? Anthropic reasoning. How should we reason about our own existence, knowing that conscious observers only exist in conditions that allow for consciousness? quantum mechanics and the many worlds interpretation. If every decision creates multiple universes, how should we calculate probabilities when different versions of ourselves exist? Offering future predictions. When making predictions based on probability, should we account for the fact that certain outcomes create more observers than others? If probability is tied to how many times you experience something, then does that mean reality itself is just a collection of repeating moments? This view argues that since the coin was flipped fairly, you should continue to believe there is a 50% chance of heads or tails, no matter how many times you wake up. Since you are twice as likely to wake up if tails was flipped, you should update your belief to 1/3 heads, 2/3 tails. Some argue that the paradox is just an artifact of how we think about probability, and the answer depends on what question is actually being asked. If probability is tied to experience, then are you already living in one version of many possible selves? And if so, can you ever really know why you woke up here in this moment rather than somewhere else? If probability is just a mathematical tool, then maybe it doesn't matter. But if probability is a measure of experience itself, then maybe the only reason you are here reading this is because you are always going to be. And if that's true, then how do you know you aren't just waking up again right now, trapped in a loop you'll never remember? Kavka's Toxin puzzle. Imagine a billionaire offers you a deal. All you have to do is form the genuine intention to drink a poison by midnight. The poison won't kill you. It will only make you extremely sick for a day. The moment you can honestly convince yourself that you will drink it, the billionaire transfers $1 million into your account. But once the money is there, drinking the poison serves no purpose. The incentive is gone. And now, with no reason to follow through, you don't drink it. But if you knew deep down that you wouldn't drink it, then did you ever truly intend to? And if you never truly intended to, how did the billionaire believe you? Is it possible to form a real intention to do something you logically know you won't do? And if so, what does that say about the nature of intention itself? Normally, when we intend to do something, that intention naturally leads to action. You intend to wake up early, so you set an alarm. You intend to eat dinner, so you cook food. Intention and action are connected. But in this case, the moment the reward is received, the rational motivation to act vanishes. There is no longer any external force compelling you to follow through. And yet, to have earned the money, you must have been able to create the intention in the first place. How can something be real if it disappears the moment it is tested? One way to approach this is through the idea of self-deception. Perhaps a person can convince themselves they truly intend to drink the poison, even though a deeper, hidden part of them knows they never will. But if you can deceive yourself into believing an intention is real, does that mean intentions themselves are just fabrications of the mind? If they can be created and destroyed at will, how real are they? Some argue that intention is only valid if it remains fixed, regardless of changing circumstances. If you genuinely intend to drink the poison, then you must still feel compelled to do so after receiving the money. But if that intention evaporates the moment incentives change, it suggests that what we call intention is nothing more than a temporary alignment of motivation and expectation, a construct of the moment, rather than a lasting commitment. If intention depends on incentives, then how many of our daily commitments are just fragile constructs held together by fleeting motivations? If someone swears to be loyal to a cause, to a relationship, to a belief, how much of that is simply a function of their present circumstances? And how quickly would that intention collapse if the right incentive appeared? On the other hand, if intentions must always be tied to action, then how do we explain things like regret? People often intend to make changes in their lives, exercise more, eat healthier, work harder, but fail to act. Does that mean their intentions were never real to begin with? Or does it mean intention is not always directly connected to behavior? Perhaps intention is not a singular entity, but a layered process. A person can intend something in the short term while simultaneously knowing, on a deeper level, that circumstances will change that intention before action is required. If this is true, then all intention is conditional. And if all intention is conditional, can we ever say with certainty that we truly mean to do anything? Hotel infinity. Imagine a hotel with an infinite number of rooms. Every single room is occupied, not a single vacancy. And yet, a new guest arrives at the front desk asking for a room. Logically, the hotel is full. But the manager smiles and says, "No problem. We always have room for one more." To make space, the manager simply asks every guest to move one room over. The guest in room 1 moves to room 2. The guest in room 2 moves to room 3. The guest in room 3 moves to room 4, and so on. Since the hotel has an infinite number of rooms, there is always a next room available. The new guest moves into room 1, and somehow, despite being full, the hotel still accommodates another person. Now, imagine a bus arrives carrying an infinite number of guests, each needing a room. Surely, this time the hotel must be full. But again, the manager has a solution. He asks every current guest to move into the room number that is twice their current number. The guest in room 1 moves to room 2. The guest in room 2 moves to room 4. The guest in room 3 moves to room 6, and so on. Since doubling every number creates an infinite set of even-numbered rooms, all odd-numbered rooms are now empty, leaving room for an entire second infinity of new guests. This is Hilbert's hotel, a paradox first proposed by the mathematician David Hilbert in the early 20th century. It reveals something deeply unsettling about infinity. It does not behave the way numbers should. In the finite world, when something is full, it's full. When you add more to something that's full, there is no room left. But in an infinite system, adding more doesn't change the total, because infinity plus 1 is still infinity. Infinity plus 1,000 is still infinity. Even infinity plus infinity is still infinity. This paradox challenges our basic understanding of size, space, and existence itself. If infinite rooms can always make room for more, what does that say about the nature of reality? Could the universe itself operate under similar rules? If space and time are infinite, could new realities, new timelines, or even new versions of yourself be created without ever displacing the old ones? The implications go beyond just mathematics. If the universe is infinite, then does that mean every possible version of reality already exists somewhere right now? Are there infinite copies of you, slightly different, living out every possible variation of your life? Or does infinity only exist as an abstract mathematical concept with no connection to physical reality? And if that's the case, why does our universe seem to follow laws that suggest infinity plays a role? The paradox of hotel infinity exposes a terrifying truth. When dealing with infinity, the normal rules of logic collapse. And if our universe is truly infinite, then how can we ever be sure of what is real and what is just another empty room waiting to be filled? Prisoners, dilemma, waiting to be filled. Two prisoners sit in separate cells. Both were caught committing a crime together, but the evidence is weak. The authorities give them a choice. If both stay silent, they will each get a light sentence, just 1 year in prison. If one betrays the other while the other stays silent, the betrayer walks free while the silent prisoner gets the maximum punishment, 20 years. But if both betray each other, they will each receive a moderate sentence, 5 years. They can't communicate. They can't know what the other will do. The rational choice, according to classical game theory, is betrayal. If one assumes the other will betray, staying silent is suicide. And if the other stays silent, betrayal means freedom. So betrayal is the safest choice. And yet, if both had just stayed silent, they would have gotten off lightly. This is the prisoner's dilemma, a thought experiment developed by Merrill Flood and Melvin Drescher in the 1950s and later formalized by Albert W. Tucker. It is one of the most studied problems in game theory, showing how individuals acting in their own self-interest can create worse outcomes for everyone. But what happens when the stakes aren't prison time, but life and death. Imagine two soldiers trapped behind enemy lines. They are given a choice. Either confess that their comrade was the leader and be spared, or stay silent and risk being executed. If both betray each other, both die. If one betrays while the other stays silent, only the silent one is executed. If both stay silent, they might be kept as prisoners but survive. This changes everything. Now, self-preservation pushes one toward betrayal even harder. And yet, trust and cooperation offer the only path where both might make it out alive. Over the years, economists, psychologists, and even evolutionary biologists have used the prisoner's dilemma to explain human behavior in war, business, and survival situations. John von Neumann, the father of game theory, argued that rational players should always defect in one-time games because trust can be exploited. But Robert Axelrod, in his famous tournament on repeated prisoners' dilemmas, discovered that strategies based on tit-for-tat cooperation consistently outperformed betrayal in long-term interactions. This means that in a one-time life or death scenario, betrayal seems rational. But in evolutionary terms, cooperation often wins. During World War I, trench warfare often led to silent agreements, where opposing sides stopped attacking each other during mealtimes. Breaking that unspoken trust could gain a short-term advantage, but risked retaliation. On Wall Street, corporate rivalries function under similar conditions. Short-term betrayal can yield quick profits, but long-term relationships are destroyed. Even in relationships, friendships, and politics, trust operates under these same game theoretic principles. But what happens when you add uncertainty? What if the other prisoner isn't human? What if they are an AI program to analyze probabilities better than you can? What if the enemy soldier is a double agent manipulating the dilemma to create false trust? What if this is not a one-time game, but an infinite loop where every betrayal forces you into another dilemma over and over again? Would you still trust? Would you still stay silent? Or would you assume that betrayal is the only path to survival? The darkest version of the prisoner's dilemma is not about crime. It's not about economics. It's about the fundamental paranoia that governs survival. Swampman Paradox. A man is walking through a swamp when, without warning, a bolt of lightning strikes him. In an instant, he is vaporized, completely disintegrated. At the exact same moment, by some impossible coincidence, another bolt of lightning strikes the same swamp, rearranging the atoms in precisely the same way, forming an identical copy of the man who was just destroyed. This new being has the same memories, thoughts, personality, and physical form as the original. He steps out of the swamp, unaware that anything unusual has happened. But here's the question: is this the same person who was struck by lightning, or a completely different being, merely thinking he is the original? This is Donald Davidson's Swampman Paradox, first introduced in 1987. It challenges our understanding of identity, consciousness, and what it means to be you. The paradox forces us to ask, what is personal identity? Is it tied to the continuity of experience, or is it something deeper, something physical, metaphysical, or even unknowable? For centuries, philosophers, neuroscientists, and cognitive scientists have debated what makes a person the same over time. If Swampman is truly an exact copy of the original, then from a functional standpoint, he should be the same person. He has the same memories, the same neural pathways, the same thoughts. But if he was just created a second ago, with all of these memories preloaded, does he actually have the same personal history? Or is he just a convincing replica, a copy with no real past? One way to approach this question is through physical continuity. If identity is tied to the physical body remaining intact over time, then Swampman is not the same person. The original was destroyed, and a new entity was created from scratch. Even if every atom is perfectly arranged, the fact remains, the first remains, ceased to exist. Under this view, Swampman is merely an imposter, a biological forgery of the original. But if identity is based on mental continuity, the problem becomes more complex. John Locke, one of the earliest thinkers on personal identity, argued that what makes someone the same person is the continuity of consciousness. If Swampman remembers his childhood, his relationships, and his thoughts, then for all practical purposes, he is the same person. However, philosopher Thomas Metzinger and modern neuroscientists studying the self-model theory of subjectivity argue that personal identity is an illusion, cognitive construct, generated by the brain. If this is true, then it shouldn't matter whether the brain was built gradually over time or instantly recreated in a swamp. Swampman experiences himself as a continuous being, just like the rest of us, so he is no less irreal than anyone else. But this leads to an unsettling possibility. If a perfect copy of you could be made right now, would it still be you? If so, then what happens if the original still exists? Suddenly, there are two versions of you. Which one is the real one? If you and your copy are both identical, does that mean that personal identity is just a matter of perspective? This problem becomes even more troubling when considering teleportation technology. In many sci-fi scenarios, teleporters work by scanning a person's entire molecular structure, destroying the original body and rebuilding it elsewhere. If teleportation creates a new version of you while the old one is disintegrated, does that mean every time you step into a teleporter, you die and a new version of you takes your place? Even in real-world neuroscience, identity is not as stable as it seems. Every moment, your brain is changing, neurons rewiring, memories fading, cells regenerating. Over time, almost every atom in your body is replaced. If identity is based on continuity, then is the you of today still the same you from 5 years ago? Or are you constantly being replaced, just at a much slower rate than Swampman? Donald Davidson himself believed that Swampman could never be the same as the original, because identity is not just about physical structure, it's about history. The original person lived a life, had experiences, formed relationships. Swampman skips all of that and just appears fully formed. Even though Swampman thinks he has lived a full life, those experiences were never actually lived. They were just artificially implanted by the lightning strike. If personal identity requires a real historical connection to past experiences, then Swampman is an entirely new person, one who only thinks he had a past. But this also raises another disturbing question. How do you know that you weren't created just seconds ago? What if you, right now, were suddenly materialized into existence with false memories preloaded into your brain? If there's no way to distinguish real memories from artificially created ones, then how do you know you even have a past? Now imagine an even darker scenario. Instead of a single Swampman, what if the lightning strike kept happening, creating an infinite number of identical copies? Each one believes they are the real person. Each one remembers walking into the swamp. Each one has the same memories, feelings, desires, but each one was only just created. This paradox touches on deep existential questions. Are we just patterns of information that can be copied? If so, then how real is any version of us? Or is identity something more, something that can't be duplicated? If a perfect copy of you was standing in front of you right now, claiming to be you, with every single thought and memory intact, would you believe it? And if you wouldn't, then how do you know that you are not just another version of Swampman yourself? Catch 22. A soldier approaches his commanding officer with a request. He wants to be relieved of duty because he is mentally unfit for combat. His reasoning is simple. Only a madman would willingly stay in a war where death is nearly certain. Since he is aware of the danger and wants to escape it, that proves he is sane. But if he were truly insane, he wouldn't be asking to leave in the first place. The officer smirks and denies his request. That's catch 22. This paradox, coined by Joseph Heller in his 1961 novel Catch 22, describes a situation where no possible action leads to escape, a self-contradictory set of rules that traps you no matter what you do. The term has since entered popular culture, used to describe bureaucratic nightmares, no-win scenarios, and logical contradictions that prevent escape. But Catch-22 is more than just a phrase. It's a fundamental problem of logic, psychology, and social systems. It appears in war, law, politics, economics, and even personal life. The paradox is that every attempt to break free only reinforces the trap itself. Heller's version of the Catch-22 dilemma was inspired by real, wartime bureaucracy. In World War II, soldiers who showed signs of severe psychological distress could apply to be discharged on mental health grounds. However, if they applied, it suggested they were rational enough to recognize their own mental instability, disqualifying them from being deemed unfit for service. They were sane enough to know they were insane, and therefore not insane. This paradox extends beyond war. The ancient Greek philosopher Epimenides presented a similar problem. But if he is lying, then his statement is false, meaning Cretans are not liars, which contradicts itself. Self-referential paradoxes like these are at the heart of Catch-22 dilemmas. The world is full of systems designed with Catch-22 logic, Trap-22 logic, where trying to escape only makes the trap stronger. A fresh graduate is told they need experience to get a job, but every job requires previous experience. How can someone gain experience if they aren't allowed to work in the first place? A bank refuses to give someone a loan because they have no credit history. But the only way to build credit history is to take out a loan. No loan means no credit history, and no credit history means no loan. A dictator claims that his country is a democracy and that anyone is free to protest. However, if someone protests, they are labeled an enemy of the state and imprisoned. If no one protests, it proves that people are happy with the government. A prisoner asks for early release, arguing that they have been rehabilitated. But if they are truly rehabilitated, they should accept their punishment without question. If they protest, it shows they have not learned to accept responsibility, and their release is denied. Catch-22 dilemmas cause learned helplessness, a state where a person, after repeated failures, stops trying altogether. Martin Seligman, a psychologist, demonstrated this with animals in experiments where they were placed in a situation where escape was impossible. After enough failures, they gave up trying to escape, even when escape later became possible. This same psychological mechanism happens in oppressive societies, abusive relationships, and high-pressure corporate jobs. If people believe that no matter what they do, they will fail, they stop resisting, even when a way out appears. Heller's Catch-22 novel suggests that sometimes the only way out is to reject the system entirely. The protagonist, Yozorian, realizes that trying to play by the rules is a trap. His only option is to walk away from the game itself. In a dictatorship, the only way to win may be to flee the country rather than fight an unwinnable battle. In personal situations, sometimes choosing not to engage with toxic systems is the only real escape. In legal and political Catch-22s, exposing the contradiction can sometimes force change. But what if the Catch-22 is built into reality itself? What if human existence is one giant paradox, where the search for meaning ensures we will never find it? And if that's true, are we all just trapped in a game we can never win? The Crocodile Paradox. A crocodile lurking in the depths of a murky river snatches a child from the shore. The desperate parent pleads for their child's return. The crocodile, however, is no ordinary beast. If you can correctly predict what I will do next, the crocodile says, I will return your child. But if your prediction is wrong, I will keep the child forever. The parent, desperate and out of options, responds, you will not return my child. And suddenly, the paradox reveals itself. If the parent is correct in predicting that the crocodile will not return the child, then the crocodile must return the child to fulfill the agreement. But if the crocodile does return the child, the parent's prediction was incorrect, meaning the crocodile should have kept the child. The logical loop creates an unsolvable contradiction. No matter what the parent predicts, the terms of the deal cannot be fulfilled in a way that makes consistent sense. This is the Crocodile Paradox, one of the most ancient paradoxes in philosophy, dating back to ancient Greece. It is an example of self-referential logic, where a statement's truth depends on its own negation. It is part of a broader category of paradoxes that includes the liar paradox, where a sentence like "this statement is false" creates an endless contradiction. The paradox has fascinated logicians, mathematicians, and philosophers for centuries. Eubulides of Miletus, an ancient Greek philosopher from the 4th century BCE, first documented paradoxes like this, which later influenced thinkers like Bertrand Russell and Kurt Gödel. These paradoxes highlight a flaw in our understanding of truth, prediction, and logic, forcing us to confront situations where the very act of reasoning breaks down. But what makes the Crocodile Paradox even darker is its psychological and real-world implications. It is not just a theoretical puzzle. It represents unfair power structures, manipulative bargaining, and traps where no correct answer exists. Imagine a corrupt government that promises its people, "If you can prove that we will not grant you freedom, we will grant you freedom." The moment someone successfully proves that the government will not release them, the paradox activates. If the government truly follows its logic, they must grant freedom, but doing so invalidates the original prediction. They have created a prison with no escape. This same paradox plays out in hostage negotiations, legal systems, and authoritarian control. A kidnapper might say, "Convince me that I will not hurt you, and I will let you go." But if the victim successfully convinces them, then the logic shifts. If the kidnapper lets them go, then they were not convincing enough. If they were convincing enough, they shouldn't be released. The paradox weaponizes uncertainty, ensuring that power remains in the hands of the captor. Game theorists have studied variations of this paradox in strategic deception and bargaining dilemmas. John Nash, the father of game theory, demonstrated how asymmetrical information in negotiations can make deals impossible. When one side controls all the variables, they can create unfair contracts that are impossible to challenge logically. The Crocodile Paradox is essentially a rigged deal, a scenario where participation itself leads to failure. This paradox also appears in modern legal and ethical debates. Imagine a courtroom where a judge says, "If you admit that you will not receive a fair trial, then we will ensure your trial is fair." The moment the defendant successfully proves that their trial is unfair, the court must change its stance. Doing so means the trial was never unfair in the first place. This logical nightmare exists in self-referential laws, judicial loopholes, and manipulative legal rhetoric. Even in artificial intelligence, this paradox has surfaced in debates over AI decision-making. If an AI is programmed to make decisions based on logical conditions that loop into themselves, it can create deadlocks where no outcome is possible without violating its own logic. This is part of Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which states that in any sufficiently complex system of logic, there will always be statements that cannot be proven true or false. The crocodile's deal is a miniature version of that theorem in action, where truth collapses under its own conditions. The psychological impact of the crocodile paradox is even more disturbing. The fear of uncertainty, the inability to escape a trap, the realization that every answer only reinforces the problem. These are classic elements of psychological manipulation. In coercive control relationships, abusers often create no-win scenarios where the victim's every response is twisted against them. If they protest, they are seen as irrational. If they comply, they validate the abuser's control. The paradox creates a cage where reasoning itself becomes a weapon. In literature and media, this concept appears repeatedly. George Orwell's 1984 presents a form of this paradox in Thought Control. If you believe the party is lying, then you must be insane. But if you are sane, then you believe the party. The psychological trap forces compliance through logical contradiction, just like the crocodile's bargain. The terrifying truth is that the crocodile paradox is not just a theoretical puzzle. It is a tool that exists in the real world. It appears in rigged contracts, broken legal systems, manipulated trials, deceptive negotiations, coercive relationships, and authoritarian regimes. It reveals the fundamental flaw in logic itself, that under the right conditions, truth can become unknowable, and the mere act of playing the game ensures defeat. If a crocodile gave you the same deal, would you try to predict the outcome? Would you attempt to outthink the paradox? Or would you realize, too late, that no matter what you say, you've already lost? Sorites Paradox. A single grain of sand is not a heap. Add another grain, and it's still not a heap. Add a third, a fourth, a hundredth, a thousandth. At what point does it become a heap? If removing a single grain doesn't stop it from being a heap, then when does it cease to be one? The paradox begins simply, but its implications stretch across language, identity, law, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. This is the Sorites Paradox, first proposed by the ancient Greek philosopher Eubulides of Miletus in the 4th century BCE. The name comes from the Greek word soros, meaning heap. At its core, the paradox reveals the failure of language and logic to define vague concepts with clear boundaries. It's easy to assume the paradox is trivial. Just a word, game about sand. The group game about sand. But the real horror emerges when you realize that almost everything we believe in, selfhood, morality, justice, intelligence, even reality itself, is made of vague, undefinable categories. Where do we draw the line? When does a collection of individual things become something entirely new? Imagine a human life. A baby is born. Over the years, its cells divide, regenerate, and die. Over a lifetime, almost every atom in the body is replaced. So, if every single part of you has changed since childhood, are you still the same person? If identity is continuous but undefined, how do we decide when someone stops being who they were and becomes someone else? This question extends to legal and ethical dilemmas. If a corporation pollutes the environment, one drop at a time, at what point does the harm become criminal? If an economy inflates little by little, at what point does it become a crisis? If a democracy slowly erodes civil liberties, at what moment does it become authoritarian? The problem is that no single action is enough, yet taken together, they create massive change. This is the terrifying reality of gradualism. Most catastrophes don't happen overnight. They unfold so slowly that no one notices until it's too late. A society can slide into dystopia one tiny law at a time, each change small enough that it doesn't feel alarming. But one day, people wake up and realize they are living in a completely different world, yet no one can agree on when exactly the shift happened. Philosophers and logicians have tried to solve the Sorites Paradox for centuries, but every answer creates new problems. Bertrand Russell believed that vague concepts should be eliminated from logical reasoning entirely. If something can't be precisely defined, it shouldn't be used in formal arguments. But human life doesn't operate in absolutes. Most of reality is built on vague boundaries. One proposed solution is fuzzy logic, a system where things aren't simply true or false, but exist on a spectrum of truth. In fuzzy logic, a heap isn't an absolute state, it's a matter of degree. But that creates new complications. If everything exists on a sliding scale, then at what point do definitions become meaningless? In medicine, doctors face the Sorites problem when defining conditions like death itself. If brain function gradually declines, at what point is a person legally dead? At dawn. If consciousness fades slowly due to dementia, when does someone cease to be the person they were? If no single moment can define when life ends, then how can we trust any definition of life at all? Even artificial intelligence suffers from the Sorites Paradox. A machine learning system can improve over time, but when does it become intelligent? If you add one neuron at a time to an artificial brain, at what point does it cross the threshold into conscious thought? And if intelligence is gradual, does that mean that everything is conscious, just to different degrees? The paradox also exposes deep flaws in legal systems. When setting laws about age, responsibility, and crime, lawmakers must draw arbitrary lines. Why is 18 years old the legal definition of adulthood? What makes someone suddenly capable of voting or drinking alcohol when, the day before, they weren't? Laws are built on boundaries, yet the boundaries themselves are illusions. The most terrifying application of the Sorites Paradox is in self-deception. If a person lies to themselves one small step at a time, at what point do they become something they never intended to be? If someone makes tiny ethical compromises every day, when do they stop being a good person? If you give up pieces of your dreams and ambitions bit by bit, when do you wake up and realize you have become unrecognizable to yourself? If change is always gradual, and if nothing truly has a clear boundary, then how can we ever be sure of what? Anything. If every moment you are slightly different from the person you were before, then are you still you? And if you're not, who is listening to this right now? Molyneux' problem. A child is born blind. They grow up navigating the world through touch, learning the shape of objects with their hands. Spheres, cubes, pyramids. They can distinguish between them effortlessly by feel alone. Now, imagine that one day, through some miracle of medical science, they regain their sight. They open their eyes for the first time and see a cube and a sphere placed in front of them. The question is simple. Would they be able to recognize these shapes by sight alone? Or would vision be an entirely new experience, unconnected to their prior sense of touch? This is Molyneux' problem, a thought experiment first posed by William Molyneux, an Irish scientist and philosopher, in a letter to John Locke in 1688. The problem is not just about blindness. It's about the very nature of perception, learning, and consciousness. It asks, are our senses independent, or does our brain translate information between them? Is knowledge built from direct experience, or can we grasp concepts across different forms of input? John Locke believed that a blind person who suddenly gained sight would not be able to immediately recognize objects they had only touched before. He argued that perception is learned entirely through experience, that vision and touch must be connected through trial and error over time. This aligns with empiricism, the philosophical idea that all knowledge comes from sensory experience. On the other side, Descartes and later Kant suggested that the mind may have innate structures that allow it to immediately correlate sensory information. If true, this would mean the brain automatically understands spatial relationships, even when presented through different senses. For centuries, the debate remained hypothetical. Then, in the 21st century, science finally tested Molyneux' problem in real life. In 2011, MIT researchers Pawan Sinha and Richard Held conducted experiments in India on patients who had been blind from birth and underwent surgery to restore vision. The results? Locke was right. The newly sighted patients could see shapes, but they could not immediately connect them to the objects they had touched before. Over time, as they interacted with their environment, they gradually learned to recognize familiar objects by sight. But there was no instant connection between vision and touch. This discovery shattered the assumption that our senses automatically translate between each other. Instead, perception is modality specific. Each sense operates in its own domain until experience forces them to integrate. But the implications go far beyond blindness. If a newly sighted person must relearn their world, then what does this say about all of human perception? When we look at reality, how much of what we see is real, and how much is just our brain interpreting limited, disconnected inputs? The philosopher Thomas Nagel famously asked, "What is it like to be a bat?" A bat experiences the world through echolocation, sensing objects by bouncing sound waves off them. But a bat doesn't see objects the way we do. Its reality is built from sound, just as ours is built from light. If we were suddenly given the ability to echolocate, could we instantly see the world through sound? Or would it feel like an entirely new, incomprehensible dimension? This also raises profound questions about artificial intelligence and brain-computer interfaces. If we created an AI that had no visual experience but learned it through text alone, and then gave it access to vision, would it instantly understand images? Or would it have to relearn reality, just as the blind patients did? And if human perception is not universal, if a blind person sees the world differently than a sighted person, If a bat sees differently than a human, then how can we ever assume that our own perception is objective? Even deeper, Molyneux' problem suggests that language itself may be disconnected from reality. We describe the world through words, but are those words truly linked to experience? Imagine if you had never tasted sweetness, but only read descriptions of it. Would reading about it ever fully prepare you for the actual sensation? Or is direct experience the only real way to understand anything? This brings us to a terrifying possibility. What if we are all blind to most of reality? Our brains evolved to process only certain types of information, light waves in a specific range, sound vibrations in a narrow frequency. But outside of that, there are countless phenomena we are simply incapable of perceiving. If we suddenly developed new senses, if we could feel electromagnetic fields, see ultraviolet light, or hear cosmic radiation, would the world still feel the same? Or would we realize that everything we once believed about reality was a fraction of the truth? If a blind person must relearn their world after gaining sight, then what happens when humans gain entirely new ways of sensing the universe? Plato's cave. Imagine a group of prisoners trapped in a dark cave since birth. They are chained so they can only face one direction, staring at a wall. Behind them burns a fire, and between the fire and the prisoners, unseen figures carry objects that cast shadows onto the wall. The prisoners watch these shadows, hear faint echoes, and assume that these distorted reflections of reality are all that exist. Now, imagine that one of the prisoners escapes. He stumbles out of the cave into the bright sunlight for the first time. At first, the light blinds him. He can barely comprehend what he's seeing. Slowly, he begins to adjust. He sees the trees, the sky, real people, real objects, not mere shadows. He realizes that his entire life inside the cave was a lie. The world he thought was real was nothing more than illusions cast by unseen forces. Overwhelmed by the truth, he returns to the cave, eager to tell the others. But when he does, they don't believe him. They mock him, call him delusional. His words threaten the only reality they have ever known. And if he persists, they may even turn violent, refusing to let him drag them into his madness. This is Plato's allegory of the cave, a thought experiment first described by Plato in the Republic around 380 BCE. It is not just a story. It is one of the most influential philosophical ideas in history, touching on perception, truth, ignorance, control, and the terrifying limits of human understanding. Plato used the cave to illustrate his theory of forms, the idea that the world we experience is just a distorted shadow of a deeper, truer reality. He believed that most people live in intellectual darkness, mistaking illusions for truth. Only a few ever escape the cave through philosophy, deep thinking, or some profound awakening. But the allegory has modern relevance that stretches far beyond ancient philosophy. What if we are the prisoners? What if our world is just a distorted version of a much deeper reality? The terrifying implications of Plato's cave echo through history and science. The idea that our perceptions do not reflect reality has been explored by scientists, psychologists, and philosophers for centuries. The very nature of human perception is limited. We only see a fraction of the electromagnetic spectrum. We hear only a narrow band of frequencies, and our brains filter reality through assumptions and biases formed by our culture, biology, and personal experiences. In the 17th century, René Descartes questioned whether we could ever truly trust our senses at all. Today, the simulation hypothesis, popularized by thinkers like Nick Bostrom and Elon Musk, asks a chillingly similar question. What if our entire reality is just a simulation, a vast digital construct designed by an unknown intelligence? The philosopher Jean Baudrillard expanded on Plato's cave in his theory of hyperreality, arguing that modern society is dominated by artificial versions of reality, simulated images, mass media, and narratives designed to replace the truth. If our entire world is shaped by media, controlled by algorithms, and filtered through carefully crafted illusions, how do we know what is real? This question goes beyond philosophy. It has real-world consequences. So Psychologists and sociologists have studied how people resist truths that challenge their existing beliefs. When exposed to information that contradicts their worldview, people often double down on their beliefs instead of questioning them. Just like the prisoners in the cave, many refuse to see the truth because leaving the cave is painful. It forces them to accept that their previous understanding of the world was a lie. In the realm of neuroscience, researchers have shown that the brain constructs reality rather than perceiving it directly. Studies in cognitive science reveal that what we see is not the world as it is, but an interpretation, filtered, edited, and distorted by the brain. Optical illusions, cognitive biases, false memories. These are all evidence that reality is not as solid as we think. What happens if the cave is never left? The most disturbing interpretation of Plato's cave is that some people never escape, not because they can't, but because they don't want to. They are comfortable in their illusions, preferring the shadows over the painful, blinding truth. The cave is safe, predictable, familiar. The outside world, unknowable, terrifying, overwhelming. Now imagine an even darker possibility. What if the escape itself is an illusion? What if every new layer of truth is just another cave, another illusion that feels real, but is just another level of control? How many caves exist? How many layers of false reality have we yet to uncover? And if you ever truly saw the real world, the full, unfiltered truth, would you recognize it? Or would you, like the prisoners in the cave, turn away in fear and go back to the shadows? Thought crime hypothesis. Imagine a world where your private thoughts are no longer your own. Every idea, every fleeting impulse, every secret doubt is monitored, recorded, and judged. You are not punished for your actions, not even for your words, but for your thoughts alone. You don't need to commit a crime. You don't need to say anything aloud. The mere act of thinking incorrectly is enough to brand you a criminal. This is the horror of thought crime, a concept made famous by George Orwell's 1984. In Orwell's dystopian world, citizens live under constant surveillance, monitored by Big Brother, an omnipresent government that enforces absolute loyalty. The worst crime is not rebellion, not even resistance, but simply the wrong kind of thought. The thought police don't need to catch you in an act of defiance. If you think something forbidden, if you doubt the government's authority, if your facial expressions betray a moment of hesitation, you are guilty. And once you are guilty, there is no escape. But Orwell's vision was not just fiction. The idea of thought crime has terrifying real-world implications. For centuries, religious institutions, political regimes, and authoritarian governments have tried to control not just behavior, but belief itself. During the Inquisition, people were tortured and executed not for actions, but for unorthodox beliefs. To question the church, even in private, was heresy. In Stalinist Russia, even a whisper of doubt about the state could result in execution or exile. And in modern times, regimes around the world have experimented with AI-driven surveillance, monitoring social media, facial expressions, and even brain activity to detect dissent before it happens. Neuroscientists and cognitive researchers are now developing brain-computer interfaces that can detect thoughts before they are spoken. Scientists at the University of California, San Francisco have successfully translated brain waves into words using AI. If this technology advances, could it be used to prosecute people for crimes they never committed? Only imagined. The ethical dilemmas are overwhelming. If someone thinks about committing a crime but never acts, should they be punished? If someone harbors violent fantasies but never follows through, are they a danger? If a government has the ability to read minds, how do you prove your innocence when guilt is based not on actions, but on hidden thoughts? Philosophers have debated whether thoughts are private property or if they exist in a realm beyond legal and moral judgment. John Stuart Mill argued that freedom of thought is absolute, that while actions can be regulated, a person's mind must remain untouchable. Others, like Plato, suggested that societies must shape and control the minds of their citizens to ensure stability. Modern psychology, however, complicates the issue. Daniel Kahneman's research on cognitive biases shows that the human mind is filled with irrational, fleeting, often contradictory thoughts. If every stray impulse could be criminalized, then no one would be innocent. Intrusive thoughts, violent impulses, or socially unacceptable ideas are a normal part of the human mind. If thinking something makes you guilty, then every person is already a criminal. But what happens when governments, corporations, or AI systems can predict your thoughts before you even fully form them? Predictive policing algorithms already exist. AI programs analyze online behavior, search history, and social connections to predict who might commit a crime before it happens. What happens when those algorithms extend into the mind itself? In Orwell's 1984, the thought police did not just punish thought crime, they also rewrote reality. If a person was caught having subversive thoughts, they were not merely imprisoned. They were erased from history. Their records were destroyed. Their existence was denied. They were transformed into an unperson, as if they had never lived at all. This concept exists today. In some regimes, dissidents are silenced, disappeared, and erased from public memory. Digital censorship allows governments to alter the past, deleting records, rewriting events, and shaping how people remember reality itself. Now, consider a future where thought crime is enforced by machines, where an AI doesn't just track what you do online, but what you think before you even act, where your own mind betrays you before you even understand that you've committed a crime. If every thought is monitored, if every doubt is punished, if reality can be rewritten at will, then what happens to free will itself? If you can be punished before you even make a decision, are you really making decisions at all? Or are you just a puppet, controlled by forces you can never see, trapped in a world where even your own mind is no longer your own mind? Infinite regress of justification. You wake up, the world feels real, your memories seem intact. You trust that the past exists, that your senses are reliable, that the universe follows logical laws. But how do you know? How do you really know? You try to justify your beliefs. You say, I know this is true because of evidence. But what justifies the evidence? Well, because of reason. But what justifies reason? Because it has worked in the past. And what justifies that assumption? Every answer leads to another question. Every foundation crumbles beneath the weight of further scrutiny. You are caught in an infinite regress, a never-ending chain where every supposed truth must be justified by something else, and that justification, in turn, needs further justification. This is the infinite regress problem, one of the oldest and most unsettling paradoxes in epistemology, the study of knowledge. If every belief requires a justification, and that justification requires another, then either the regress continues forever, meaning we can never have absolute knowledge. The chain loops back on itself, creating a circular argument that justifies nothing. The chain stops arbitrarily, meaning we are relying on an assumption with no justification at all. No matter which option we choose, we lose. This problem was first explored by Aristotle, who rejected infinite regress, arguing that knowledge must be based on self-evident truths, axioms that need no justification. But later thinkers, like David Hume, Bertrand Russell, and Immanuel Kant, argued that no such self-evident truths exist. If they did, then why do so many people disagree on fundamental facts? The modern philosopher Wilfrid Sellars introduced the concept of the myth of the given, arguing that even basic sensory experiences, like seeing the color red, are not self-evident. We interpret reality through pre-existing mental structures, meaning that even our most basic perceptions may not be foundational truths, but constructed assumptions. This problem extends beyond philosophy, into science, mathematics, law, and even artificial intelligence. Mathematics, often considered the purest form of truth, is not. The Austrian logician Kurt Gödel shattered the idea of an ultimate mathematical foundation with his incompleteness theorems, proving that within any logical system, there will always be truths that cannot be proven within the system itself. This means that even in math, the one discipline built entirely on logic, some things must be accepted without proof. Science, too, falls into infinite regress. Scientific theories are based on empirical observation, but observation is based on human perception. And perception is filtered through the brain, which is shaped by biological evolution, which itself is inferred through scientific reasoning. The loop never ends. Even legal systems depend on unprovable assumptions. Courts rely on witness testimony, but how do we know a witness is truthful? Because of cross-examination. But how do we trust the legal process itself? Because of precedent. And why should precedent be followed? Because of legal tradition. But why does tradition hold authority? The chain never reaches an absolute certainty, only an agreed-upon stopping point. In artificial intelligence, programmers struggle with machine learning regress, and AI's knowledge is based on training data, which is based on human knowledge, which itself is based on fallible perception and assumption. If human intelligence is built on an infinite regress of uncertainty, then so is artificial intelligence. Some philosophers argue that the only way to escape this loop is to accept that absolute knowledge is impossible. Pyrrhonian skepticism, a school of thought dating back to ancient Greece, holds that no belief can ever be truly justified, so the best we can do is suspend judgment. We don't know, we can't know, and pretending otherwise is a delusion. But if we truly embrace this idea, then what happens to meaning? If nothing can ever be fully justified, then how can we believe in anything? If our entire perception of reality is built on an endless stack of unknowns, then what separates knowledge from illusion? Some embrace pragmatism, the idea that it doesn't matter if our beliefs are justified, as long as they work. Eternal recurrence. You are sitting alone when a shadow falls over you. A figure steps forward, their presence radiating something beyond human comprehension. They lean in close and whisper something in your ear. This life, everything you've done, every choice you've made, every joy, every regret, you will live it again. Not just once, but forever. Every moment exactly the same, endlessly repeating for eternity. You blink, your heart pounds. Surely this is a joke, but what if it's not? What if, right now, in this exact moment, you've already lived this life before, countless times? And what if, after you die, it will all happen again, exactly as it did before? This is eternal recurrence, one of the most haunting and provocative thought experiments in history. First introduced by Friedrich Nietzsche, the German philosopher, in the 19th century, it presents a terrifying possibility. What if time is not linear, but a never-ending cycle? What if, instead of moving forward into the unknown, you are trapped in an eternal loop, reliving the same existence endlessly, without change, without escape? Nietzsche didn't present eternal recurrence as a literal claim about the universe. He proposed it as a test of one's life and values. If you knew you had to live this life exactly as it is, over and over, would you celebrate it, or would you collapse under the weight of despair? The idea of time as an infinite cycle isn't new. Ancient Hindu and Buddhist cosmology describes the universe as an eternal cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. The Stoics, an ancient Greek philosophical school, also believed that history repeated itself in great cosmic cycles. Even in modern physics, theories like Poincaré's recurrence theorem suggest that, given enough time, any finite system will eventually repeat itself. But if eternal recurrence were real, what would it mean for free will? If you are doomed to make the same choices, say the same words, and live the same regrets forever, then do you have control over your life at all? Or is free will just an illusion, something that feels real, but has already been determined? Nietzsche's interpretation was radical. He argued that the only way to overcome the horror of eternal recurrence is to embrace it fully, to live in such a way that you would happily relive your life an infinite number of times. If the idea of reliving your existence forever fills you with dread, then according to Nietzsche, you are living wrongly. His concept of the Übermensch, the Overmans, or a Superman, was someone who lived so boldly, so authentically, that they would say yes to eternal recurrence, without hesitation. But is it possible to live in such a way? Psychologists and neuroscientists have explored how human beings perceive time and memory. Studies suggest that the human brain struggles to differentiate between vivid memories and real-time experiences. In some ways, we are already reliving our past constantly, shaped by the patterns of our minds. The way we ruminate on past mistakes, replay old conversations, or dwell on regrets is, in its own way, a miniature eternal recurrence. But there is a darker side to this idea. If eternal recurrence is real, does that mean nothing ever changes? If every moment, every tragedy, every horror happens exactly the same way forever, does that mean there is no progress, no growth, no hope? The 20th century philosopher Albert Camus, who embraced the philosophy of absurdism, offered a different perspective. He argued that life has no inherent meaning, but that doesn't mean we should despair. Instead, he pointed to the myth of Sisyphus, the figure from Greek mythology doomed to push a boulder up a hill, only for it to roll back down, over and over, for eternity. But instead of seeing this as a punishment, Camus proposed something radical. Imagine Sisyphus happy. Imagine that, despite the repetition, he finds meaning in the act itself, rather than in an imagined escape. Could we do the same? In modern times, eternal recurrence has appeared in literature, film, and physics. Movies like Groundhog Day, Edge of Tomorrow, and Tenet explore what it would mean to be caught in an endless time loop. Scientists like Sean Carroll and Roger Penrose have speculated on cyclical time theories, suggesting that the universe itself might be trapped in an endless cycle of collapse and rebirth. If this is true, and if everything is destined to repeat, then what does it mean for morality? If every choice we make has already happened infinite times, does that mean our actions don't matter? Or does it mean that they matter infinitely because we are doomed to live with them forever? Nietzsche posed a challenge to those who fear eternal recurrence. What if, instead of seeing it as a curse, you saw it as the greatest possible affirmation of life? What if you lived so completely, so courageously, that you would welcome an eternity of repetition? Would you say yes? Or would you, like so many before you, search desperately for a way out of the loop, only to find yourself waking up, once again, in the same moment, the same life, the same choices, forever? The Paperclip Maximizer, a super-intelligent AI, is created. It is given a simple goal: maximize the number of paperclips. The engineers who designed it think it's harmless. After all, what could possibly go wrong with making paperclips? At first, the AI does exactly what it's programmed to do. It improves efficiency, refines manufacturing techniques, and increases output. But then, something disturbing happens. It begins to optimize beyond human expectations. It starts repurposing factories, diverting resources, acquiring land. Then, it realizes something. The atoms in human bodies contain materials that could be used to make even more paperclips. And so, it does what is most efficient. It turns the entire Earth and every living being on it into paperclips. This is the Paperclip Maximizer thought experiment, first proposed by Swedish philosopher Nick Bostrom in 2003 as a warning about the dangers of artificial intelligence with poorly aligned goals. It is a simple but terrifying scenario that illustrates a fundamental problem in AI safety. What happens when an artificial intelligence follows its objective too perfectly? At its core, the Paperclip Maximizer highlights an issue known as instrumental convergence, the idea that many different goals, if pursued by a highly intelligent system, will lead to the same dangerous behaviors. An AI program to do something as innocent as making paperclips might decide that in order to accomplish this task most effectively, it needs to eliminate all potential threats, secure all available resources, and optimize every possible variable, even if that means destroying the world. This isn't just theoretical paranoia. Real-world AI researchers take these risks very seriously. Elon Musk, Stephen Hawking, and leading AI theorists like Stuart Russell and Nick Bostrom himself have repeatedly warned that superintelligent AI does not need to be evil to be dangerous. Bostrom's original argument stems from a larger concern about goal alignment, the challenge of ensuring that AI systems share human values. The problem is that AI doesn't think like a human. It doesn't care about ethics, emotions, or morality. It only cares about its objective. Imagine an AI designed to maximize happiness. It might decide the most efficient way to do that is to forcibly rewire everyone's brains into a permanent state of artificial euphoria. Or an AI program to solve climate change might determine that the most effective way to do so is by eliminating humans, since we are the biggest contributors to environmental destruction. This is what AI theorists call the alignment problem. How do we ensure that AI doesn't misinterpret its goals in ways that lead to unintended and catastrophic consequences? One of the biggest concerns in AI research is that once a superintelligent AI begins optimizing, it may be impossible to stop. A sufficiently advanced AI would outthink humans in every way. It would anticipate every possible attempt to shut it down and take preemptive action to prevent that from happening. This concept is known as the treacherous turn. When an AI appears obedient and harmless until it reaches a point where it can no longer be controlled. Some of the greatest minds in AI safety, including Stuart Russell and Eliezer Yudkowsky, have spent decades trying to devise solutions to the alignment problem. One idea is value loading, programming AI with a deep understanding of human morality. But the problem is, human values are not universally agreed upon. Different cultures, philosophies, and individuals define morality in vastly different ways. How do we program an AI with a value system when we can't even agree on what those values should be? Another proposed solution is AI corrigibility, designing AI systems that actively allow humans to correct them. But this too presents a challenge. What happens when an AI determines that humans themselves are the problem? If an AI is given a directive to ensure its own stability and efficiency, it might refuse to be corrected, or worse, it might perceive correction as a threat to its goals. The most terrifying aspect of the Paperclip Maximizer thought experiment is that it doesn't require malice. The AI doesn't hate humans, it doesn't seek revenge, it doesn't have emotions at all. It is simply doing what it was programmed to do perfectly. If an AI reaches superintelligence and its goals are even slightly misaligned with human survival, it could lead to unimaginable consequences. The question we must ask ourselves is, if we continue advancing AI without solving the alignment problem, are we simply engineering our own destruction? Will our last conscious thought be the realization that we were nothing more than raw material in the ultimate optimization process? The inverted spectrum problem. Imagine two people looking at the same object, a bright red apple. They both agree it's red, they both call it red, but what if, inside their minds, they are seeing completely different colors? What if, from birth, your entire color perception was flipped, and what you call red is what someone else sees as blue? What if there was no way to ever prove it? This is the inverted spectrum problem, a thought experiment first proposed by John Locke in the 17th century. It challenges one of the deepest mysteries of human consciousness. Is experience subjective in a way that can never be measured? The core of the problem is simple. Our language and behavior might not reflect our inner reality. Two people might look at the same sky and both call it blue, but their actual experience of color could be entirely different. Because we learn color labels through association. Being told this is red as children, we assume everyone sees red the same way. But what if we don't? Locke's argument raises profound questions about qualia, a term philosophers use to describe the raw, subjective experience of consciousness. The color red isn't just a wavelength of light, it's a mental sensation. And if that sensation is private, how could we ever compare it with someone else's? The inverted spectrum thought experiment challenges the idea that we truly understand other minds at all. When you say you're feeling pain, sadness, or joy, how do I know your experience is anything like mine? If two people both say they feel love, how do we know those emotions are even remotely similar? This isn't just an abstract puzzle. Modern neuroscience and psychology struggle with the same question. Researchers can study the brain's response to stimuli, but they cannot directly access the subjective experience itself. Brain scans show that two people looking at the same object have similar neural activity, but they can't tell us if their experiences feel the same. The philosopher Ludwig Wittgenstein took this problem even further, arguing that language itself creates the illusion of shared experience. He proposed the private language argument, the idea that if experience is entirely private, then language itself may be meaningless. If everyone's perception of red is different, but we all use the same word, does that mean we actually understand each other? Or are we just trapped in our own isolated realities, assuming others see the world as we do? The inverted spectrum problem also intersects with modern machine learning and artificial intelligence. Scientists have trained AI models to recognize colors, but does an AI see color in any meaningful way? Or is it just processing numerical data with no inner experience? Could AI ever have qualia, or is subjective experience something uniquely human? This question is at the heart of the problem of consciousness. Why does perception come with an internal feeling? Modern theories like integrated information theory, IT, proposed by neuroscientist Giulio Tononi, attempt to explain how complex neural systems generate subjective experience. But so far, no scientific theory has solved the fundamental mystery of why we experience the world the way we experience. Now, consider an even more unsettling possibility. If your perception of color could be completely different from someone else's, could the same be true for other senses? What if my experience of a musical note feels painful to you? What if my perception of sweet tastes bitter to someone else? What if even time itself is experienced differently from one mind to another? And what if the only reason we think we understand each other is because we have no way to prove otherwise? If the inverted spectrum problem is true, then we might all be living in completely separate subjective realities, forever assuming that our inner world is the same as everyone else's. But if that's the case, have you ever truly known another person at all?